Now, in the note you sent, it said 8 o'clock. Is that because the part of the ordinance is going to start at 8 o'clock?
Yeah, so the
Right.
agenda has that at that time.
Yeah, the public hearing
Got it.
for the meeting is that the resident comments will start roughly 7:31.
Got it. Okay. I've got.
I'm going to say 7:35.
Okay.
Okay. So I think we got all of the council are here. So we can,
Call the meeting.
yep. Can go ahead.
Okay, let's call the meeting to order. And is Keith present?
Yes, I'm here, Susan, and good evening to everybody.
Hi, Keith.
Hello to Susan. Okay, hello to Susan, and also to Todd, and to Niles, to Jeff, to Arthur, to Katja, to all the nice people there that are in on the meeting right now. And let me just tell you that this is the first measurable rain that we've had since March the 1st. And here at the weather station, we've had just about a half an inch. There's more to come. A little later on this evening, you could actually hear some rumbles of thunder, maybe even see some lightning. And at the very end of this precipitation event, which will be about 5 a.m. in the morning, which none of you will probably see, but if you do and get up and look out at the street light, you might even see a few flakes of snow as the storm winds down and moves out. And then it'll be windy tomorrow. The sun will come out. The sun should shine very brightly tomorrow, but it will be windy. And that will herald the arrival of a really nice weekend, 50s on Saturday and up in the low 60s on Sunday. And that weather should carry right through into most of next week before there's the chance of more showers at the end of next week. It's looking like spring has sprung, and that I've officially declared old man winter dead. I've made that pronouncement and that declaration. And it looks like a warm spring, not necessarily a whole lot of rain that's going to lead to a hot, humid summer. So what else is new?
Maybe.
Right, I think
Okay,
that's
Okay.
If I can plant, when I plant my beans in the week.
You got to read your statement.
Yes. Okay.
I think you're safe with that, Arthur. Yes.
Okay, out in the garden.
Not tomatoes yet, but you can plant the beans and whatever else.
Okay.
I want to thank everyone for letting me speak, and I guess when we do the update on the engagement committee later, I'll be back on.
That'll be just a few minutes, so stay tuned.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Keith. I like your report. Okay, so next we have an opportunity to hear resident comments on subjects other than the proposed ordinance. So if you would like to register a comment on something, I would remind you to please state your name and street for the record, and keep your comments to 2 minutes so that you don't take other residents' time.
Can I
I
go?
have a comment.
Okay.
This is Katie Filipchek Howard. I'm at 3510 Taylor Street.
Hi.
In reviewing the minutes and listening to the audio of the February 2021 Village Council meeting, as part of the village manager's report, why was there no mention of a potential gas leak at 7200 Chestnut Street, the site of a major remodeling site, which resulted in the evacuation of residents up and down Taylor and Chestnut Streets? This produced a major scare and inconvenience to residents who were displaced more than 2 hours the afternoon of February 12th, 2021. For council members and residents who might not be familiar with the situation, the contractor at 7200 Chestnut broke the home's gas meter. The fire department was
He's
called,
reading a prepared statement.
and responders ran up and down, banging on our doors to evacuate immediately. Our streets were then blocked off. And communication and updates were minimal from the VMA office, as Taylor and Chestnut residents had to drive around aimlessly, because there's not a lot of places you can go during a pandemic with our kids and our pets in tow. So this event occurred days before the last village meeting. It is unfortunate that affected residents were not recognized, and there has been no follow-up by the village manager since this event. And on another note, I mean, the residents at the intersection of Taylor, Chestnut, and Delafield, the site of another dueling and equally major building site, we're constantly impacted. We get told of no parking signs, a day late and $1 short. One-way Taylor Street is already a driving and parking challenge, so it would be appreciated going forward if the village manager could improve his communications.
Okay, thank you. Thanks,
May-
Katie. Anyone else?
Yes, I'd like to speak. I'm Marty Langland from Chestnut Street, longtime village volunteer and concerned citizen. But I would like to just follow up on Katie's statement because the fire trucks that went to the gas leak had trouble getting down Chestnut Street because of the parking on both sides and the trucks and everything. We have a lot of delivery trucks, of course, throughout the neighborhood. But the fire engines actually sat outside my house with sirens going for probably close to 5 minutes before they could even get down the street. So it goes to the notion of really safety. I'm very glad we have a new safety task force because I was really worried why this fire truck couldn't get down the street to the gas leak. And of course, that just compounds Katie's concern and all the neighbors in the area because it was quite dangerous. And this is the second time, by the way, that we've had a construction site break a major gas line here. It happened on Chestnut Street a couple years ago when the main gas line was broken by a contractor who was building. So, you know, there's an issue here of safety on many levels, and communication is the first part of any safety plan. So, Katie, I want to thank you for bringing that up to everybody's attention because I was worried too. But I do want to take a minute here to say something really positive because I've been struck through this whole long winter of the pandemic by people who have actually taken the initiative to do something really positive and helpful for our community. And I want to just take a minute here to do a positive shout out to a couple people. Linda Kirsten and Debbie Brown from MANA, of course. Everybody who works with Chevy Chase at Home, you guys have been lifesavers for so many of our elders. I want to thank Amy Herman for all the great work putting together the sandwiches and everything for Martha's Table. That's a great new community initiative. Amy, I don't really know you. I think I've met you twice in my life, but thank you so much. I think your whole family's involved in it. It's a great community project. And I want to give an extra special shout out right now to Lynn Welly. Many of you probably noticed that you had in your, mail, not on your doorstep or in your front door, a nice big reprint from the Washington Post of the Where We Live article about Martin's Additions. Well, Lynn Welly took the initiative to call the Washington Post, get those copies delivered to him, and then he walked them around personally, all by himself, to every single house in the village. And the extras, copies of that, are now in the village office. Niles, I think you have them, to go into every welcome package for every new resident who moves in for the next, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, as long as they last. Lynn, I thought that was the nicest thing to do. It was
very nice, and we have
and I just want
for that.
to say, Lynn Welly, that was a thoughtful initiative, and you did it from start to finish. Kudos, thank you. You made a smile on my face. And that's the kind of thing that I just love to see. People just taking the initiative to do something positive, because we all need that, I think, so much. And so, happy spring, everyone, and many thanks to the folks who took that kind of positive, helpful initiative, because it made my community better for, I think, me, and I expect for all of us. Thank you all.
We do welcome positivity, and we also welcome any additional comments. Does anyone else have anything to say at this time that doesn't concern the ordinance? If not, then we will go to committee updates. And Keith, you will be on again. Keith Allen?
Oh, I'll unmute. I'll see. You should be. He's muted right now, so just give him a second, and then we'll.
Okay.
All right.
Am I on, Niles?
Yes, you are. Mm-hmm.
Hello, Niles.
Yep.
I'm sorry about that. I apologize about that. Okay, we're going to have a meeting. The engagement committee is going to have a meeting very soon regarding going forward here with a couple of the events that we hope we'll be doing this summer and in the fall. We'll just have to see how things go as far as that's concerned, but we're looking forward to that. And I wanted to, also commend Lynn Welly. I'm glad that Marty did that because he went around to every home in Martin's Additions, and that was outstanding as far as I was concerned. He's got some very, very good ideas about moving forward that we want to hear about during our next meeting. Anyway, as far as our engagement committee is concerned, we do have some things that we want to discuss, and we want to set that up at some point here in the future to have another meeting. And I guess that's about it as far as the engagement committee is concerned right now.
That sounds good, Keith. You think that meeting will be in the next month or so?
Yes, absolutely.
That sounds good.
Yep. Thank you, Susan.
Hard work.
Susan, this is Jeff Lander here. Just before we transition, I'd love to make a motion if we could make or appoint a council liaison to the engagement committee. I believe it's the only committee that we haven't appointed one, and could we do that now, or does that have to wait?
I think that can be administrative. Am I right?
I know we mentioned that about 6 months ago, so could
Yeah.
you, how does that happen?
So why don't, if you want to be if you want to be the liaison, sure.
Could we take a vote on it?
Well, I guess we could.
Awesome.
Does anybody have any strong feelings either way about liaison to CEC?
I support it.
Sure. So all in favor?
Go do it.
Aye.
Awesome. Thank
Go
you,
for
folks.
it. All right, so moving along, election committee updates, please, if Tiffany Cisna is available.
Yes, Tiffany Cisna on the election committee with George McAleese and Anna Meenan. Our election season is rolling along. The nominations deadline was March the 5th, and we will have a competitive election for the two seats that will be open for this cycle. All candidate statements will be out to the community no later than Friday the 26th, and we're going to continue to follow our communications plan, which includes emails that are standalone emails, as well as notes in the wrap-up and mailings.
Tiffany, can you share how many residents brought their name forward or were volunteered?
Not yet, because we have our candidate statement deadline tomorrow.
Got it.
Sorry.
No, no worries.
Are you able to comment on whether we have at least as many candidates as possible seats?
Yes, we will have a competitive election this year.
Excellent. That's what we like to hear. Ambitious and eager residents. Katie?
May I ask, can there be a comment section for the upcoming election, or will you do that at the end?
At the end. At the
Okay.
end of the meeting. Yeah.
I have something to comment on.
Okay. At the end of the meeting. Thanks.
Susan, this is Jeff here. There's one thing I just want to put on the table because I'm not sure how many people will be at the end, and I'll make it quick. Tiffany, thank you and the committee for all the hard work. I know it's one of those jobs that's thankless, and you usually get pinged if folks feel something isn't going right, but you rarely get the emails that congratulate you. So I just want to say that. One thing I want to put on the table, which I think we all recognize, especially in the pandemic and with the United States Postal Service, is within the policy currently, there's a 1 week window between when there's a postmark and then when the actual ballot is supposed to be received by the vendor. I just want to put that out there because I think the 1 week is a risky proposition, and whether or not, if the ballots go out earlier and we can shift that to a 2-week window, or we can look at expanding that to 2 weeks, moving and pushing that out. I just put that out there. We don't have to make a decision today, nor talk about it at length, but I know there's been a lot of concern about that. Folks have written to me, and also it was something I was thinking about. So that's just for the committee and council to consider. Thank you.
I don't know if the council wants to talk about it or just, I'll note right now as you guys decide whether you'll consider it another date, it's postmarked by. So what we learned from last year's election is that the ballots come into the village earlier. Most of the ballots are mailed back earlier. So the 1 week is a reminder. We anticipate that most of the ballots that will be cast will have been mailed back before then.
Thanks, Tiffany. That makes sense. I thought it would be more of a kind of a educational thing, but just putting that out there because there's a lot of folks who may not be listening and don't frequently read the minutes, and it's just one of those things of making sure folks recognize that. But totally appreciate it. Thanks.
And if I could add, perhaps it might be helpful. The election vendor suggested that second date because sometimes ballots are received with no stamp, no postmark. And so, if a ballot shows up without a postmark, we still want to count it. And so, the rules say if it shows up without a postmark, but it at least shows up by the 20th, then it'll be counted.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, do we have anything further on? No other committee updates, so I think we're ready for your report. Doug Lohmeyer, the building administrator's report.
Oh, and Susan, if I could just mention real quick as well, in spirit of Jeff's comment to educate the voters, the Electech service provider did note that ballots are taking 2 to 3 days on average, sometimes as long as 7 to 10 days. So voters should get their ballots in early, get them in the mail early.
It's always a good idea to vote early, if not often.
And Ron, thanks. I just wanted, for everyone who's on this call tonight, I just want to just reference that I also consider myself a voter and need education. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thanks.
Okay, Doug, I think you are on now. Doug Lohmeyer.
All right, good evening.
Hi.
Yes. Couple items to go over. At 3506 Bradley, demolition and building permit have been submitted to the village office. That project is still scheduled to begin sometime this spring, but we haven't received a county permit yet, so that's on hold. At 7200 Chestnut, the applicant submitted a permit for an addition to the west side of the building. The village permit was issued in October, and construction has begun on that project. At 113 Quincy Street, they're constructing a detached garage at the back of the house, which is under construction. At 3515 Raymond Street, they've applied to remove the existing house and construct a new house. That village permit was issued in February. The existing house has been removed, and construction has begun on the new house. And at 7200 Summit Avenue, just a reminder that the council approved a waiver on that project back in July. And according to the code, a building permit has to be issued within 12 months of that variance. So that deadline's coming up in 2 or 3 months. And that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Next, we have approval of the minutes of last month's meeting. Are there any comments, or can we move to approve the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Somebody,
I move to approve.
okay, second? Okay, I'll second.
And then call the vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hello, hi, John Searles. Hello.
Oh,
John Searles, 3506 Shepherd.
Okay, we're almost ready for the public hearing, if you were here for that.
yeah. Just
Hi.
give it 1 second.
Okay.
Momentarily.
Yeah, fine.
I went ahead and muted.
Were there any no's on the minutes? No? Okay, so we're ready to move on. Okay, so at this point, we will begin the public hearing on possible adoption of ordinance 2021.
Yeah, I'll mute. There we go. It is muted.
Okay, thank you. Public hearing on ordinance 2021-1-1, an ordinance to expand the jurisdiction of the Ethics Committee to include oaths of service and to add complaint resolution procedures. Mark Efren, would you like to begin or conclude this?
I'm happy to start.
Okay, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, set the stage. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak. For those who don't know me, and I think at this point my name is spread far and wide, I am chair of the Ethics Committee, which is responsible for the drafting of the contemplated changes to the village's ethics code. When this task began last August, I never imagined that there'd be so much consternation about assuring that people making decisions on behalf of the village do so with, quote, impartiality. Indeed, what the committee undertook was totally aligned with the village's existing oath of office and with the state of Maryland's public ethics law, which states, and I quote, "The General Assembly, recognizing that our system of representative government is dependent on maintaining the highest trust by the people in the government officials, finds and declares that the people have a right to be assured that the impartiality and independent judgment of those officials be maintained." As it turns out that my expectation of smooth sailing was wrong. A number of village residents have created a lot of email and other traffic, and unfortunately at times misinformation about the proposed changes to the village code. To be fair, other village residents have provided helpful feedback and comments and support, for which the Ethics Committee is grateful. Let me try to set the record straight about what the proposed changes are and are not. Before I review the proposed changes, I want to address the Ethics Committee's process. To the person or people who in the last day or so have complained that the process was non-transparent and secretive, I ask respectfully, where have you been? Since August, when the committee was asked to undertake the task of revising the existing code, there have been 4 open and lengthy committee meetings attended by scores of village residents, in which drafts of the code revisions were reviewed, critiqued, and edited. Prior to each of these meetings, detailed agendas were posted, together with links to the draft that were to be discussed, so that village residents could follow the committee's work and comment on the drafts themselves. For the last 2 of the meetings, the committee explicitly invited written comments on the drafts it would be discussing, so that the committee could consider them at the meeting. And soon after each meeting, detailed minutes were posted on the village website. In addition, there were at least 3 open council meetings when the committee's work was discussed, often at length. I understand and sincerely respect differences of opinion about the substance of the committee's proposed code changes. But I must push back publicly and as forcibly as I possibly can on the demonstrably false and reckless allegations about the openness of the committee's work. Now to the proposed changes themselves. First thing, the contemplated code changes do not create the requirement that village officials act with impartiality. That requirement is created by the village's existing oath of office, under which each village employee, council member, and committee member must swear to, and I quote, faithfully execute my duties with strict impartiality, in accordance with the charter of the Village of Martin's Additions, the Code of Ordinances, and any other rules and procedures adopted by the council.
Who is this?
What the existing code changes do is to create accountability for the existing requirements of impartiality. Without these code changes, there is no process to address complaints of impartiality. A situation which concluded resolving several potentially serious complaints of personal bias over the past 80 years. So this has not been a hypothetical undertaking. It addresses serious violations of an existing ethics requirement that could not be addressed in the past. The village's oath and the contemplated code changes align with the Maryland State Code, which, as I said before, states that the people have a right to be assured that the impartiality and independence of those officials will be maintained. That language has been adopted by the Maryland Municipal League, of which Martin's Additions is a member, and by Montgomery County. Could I please ask that whoever does not have their themselves muted, please do it? That language, again, that the people have the right to be assured that the impartiality and independent judgment of officials be maintained, has been cited in opinions by the Maryland State Ethics Commission, even though impartiality the Maryland Code. The contemplated village code does, however, defined in code, requires officials to make decisions based on objective criteria and not on personal bias, prejudice. This code requires officials to be fair and not give preferential treatment to any persons or organizations in performing their duties. This is not a broad definition that encompasses all sorts of bad behavior, as some residents have suggested. It is narrowly focused on prohibiting personal bias and objective criteria and fairness. The definition of impartiality in the proposed village code is more specific than the Maryland Code, which, as I said, has no definition at all, yet there have been decisions by the Maryland Board on that term. The definition in the Martin's Addition proposed code aligns with the U.S. government's and the Department of Justice's Statement of Principles of Ethical Conduct, which say in part, employees shall act impartially and not give preferential treatment to any private person or individual. It also aligns with generally accepted legal and general definitions from many sources, and we have been advised, or the committee was advised by the Village Council, that the definition is consistent with Maryland law and with the Maryland Code statement that I've made before, that I've quoted from before. I would point out that if any person subject to the village's impartiality requirement has a concern about his or her ability to act with impartiality on a specific matter, he or she can recuse themselves from the matter, or, under the proposed code, he or she can request an advisory opinion from the Ethics Committee, a provision that our committee added to provide clarity if there is any doubt in the mind of a village official. Further, the contemplated code requires the dismissal of any ethical complaints that allege violations that are, quote, insubstantial, and that is defined as being too remote to affect the integrity of an official's decision. Under the contemplated code provisions, there is no room for complaints over petty grievances, as some residents seem to fear. To be sure, just as the current code provides with respect to complaints filed with the Ethics Committee about financial or business conflicts of interest. Under the proposed code provisions, the Ethics Committee and the Council would have to exercise their judgment over the validity of a complaint about the failure to act with impartiality. However, unlike the current code, there are many features in the contemplated code that ensure fairness and preclude arbitrary decisions by the committee or the council. These provisions include, to be filed, a complaint must be, quote, fact-based, and those facts must be, quote, accurate and complete. Second, all complaints would be subject to, and I quote, an initial assessment by the Ethics Committee, which would dismiss any complaint that is not supported by facts or does not constitute a consequential ethics violation or falls outside of a one-year statute of limitations or involves a person who is no longer a village official. Next, the Ethics Committee and the Council are required under the proposed code to seek informal resolutions of ethics complaints throughout the process. If the complaint survives the initial assessment, the person who is the subject of the complaint would be given time to respond to the complaint, would be given access to evidence produced or developed by the committee, and would be given the opportunity to respond to the committee's draft report of the investigation. And if the council will make the final determination, the person would be given similar due process rights. These provisions do not exist in the existing code, and they were included in the contemplated changes to the code to protect the rights of anybody who is the subject of an ethics complaint. The Ethics Committee and the Council can only find an ethics violation if there is clear and convincing evidence, and I emphasize evidence of a violation. This is a high burden of proof. By contrast, the existing code has no required burden of proof. This standard of proof means that a violation can be found only if it is based on evidence that is highly and substantially more likely to be true than untrue. To those several residents who have likened the proposed process to a Star Chamber proceeding, I urge you to read proposed code provisions. Together with the extensive due process requirements and the separate reviews by the Ethics Committee and the Council, the required standard of proof should alleviate concerns about arbitrary decisions. A couple of additional notes. Confidentiality. The proposed code changes include confidentiality provisions that are enhanced from those in the current code. These changes are designed explicitly, and I quote, to protect the privacy and the reputation of the respondent, that is, the person who's responding to an ethics complaint. But they can be waived by the respondent if he or she wishes them to be waived. Second, penalties and remedies. Contrary to at least what one village resident seems to suggest, there are no criminal penalties for ethics violations under the proposed code. There are potential criminal penalties under the current code, but the Ethics Committee did not think they were necessary to assure the ethical behavior required by the code. Under the contemplated code changes, the penalty for an ethics violation is for the offending official to be disqualified from participating in a particular matter or from his or her position, and that remedy must be crafted as narrowly as possible to address the violation. Finally, in response to the suggestions that these provisions, while perhaps important, and indeed one of the most vociferous commenters on this code acknowledges in an email to me that we all agree that bias is a serious problem if and when it occurs, and we all agree that village officials must be held accountable. In response to the suggestions that these provisions, while important, could be contained in a village or employee handbook rather than in the code, or that the provisions are not necessary at all, because the council already has the implicit power to remove anybody from the village position, I offer the following. While a handbook could possibly be binding on volunteers or employees, it would not be binding on anybody else in the village. For example, a resident who wished to pursue an ethics complaint. Codification of the changes is necessary to assure that the provisions have unquestioned legal effect, just as the code currently provides for considerations of financial and business conflicts of interest. And while the council may have the implicit power to remove a person from a village position, past experience has shown that it is very possible that the council could not obtain a quorum to act on an ethics-related complaint because of necessary recusals by council members. And even if there is a necessary quorum, an action without a required process, which is the case right now, runs the risk of being challenged as being unfair and arbitrary, or as some might say, Star Chamber-like. With that, I will stop. I thank you for your patience and time, and I'll turn the mic back to you, Susan, for other people's comments.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I will note that Mark had a bit of an extended time by virtue of his greater investment in the process. We will now hear from residents who would like to register their opinions on the proposed ordinance. And we ask that residents identify themselves with their name and street address, and please be mindful that a number of people would like to speak, so please keep your comments to about 2 minutes.
Hang on 1 second.
Anyone want to speak?
Yes.
Okay. Could you please identify yourself and your street?
My name is Jeffrey Goldberg. I live at 207 Oxford Street. I will try to be very, very brief. I am interested as well as the comments of my fellow residents. 1, in 52 years as a resident in Martin's Additions, I have lived without the proposed ordinance. 1 episode of inappropriate hiring, recruiting, poor due diligence, and selecting of a village manager does not warrant a solution in search of a problem as your proposed ordinance demands. 2, any proposed ordinance should be and must be subject to a community vote of all residents, not just approval of an unelected ethics committee. 3, any vote for or against the proposed amendment or ordinance should be delayed until the new village elections take place to maintain in part the current composition of the council or replace them. 4, I and others were promised by the ethics committee or individual members thereof that they would carefully consider a proposed personnel manual. The proposed personnel manual, worked on by volunteers, was dismissed originally as not having legal weight. 5, the position that a personnel manual has no legal weight in employment matters is incorrect based on Equal Opportunity Commission Council case law, National Labor Relations Board case law, Federal Labor Relations Authority case law, Fair Labor Standards case law, wage and hour case law, and private and public sector arbitration precedents. This also includes state and municipal county precedents. I was promised by some members of the Ethics Committee, a showing of any other village or township similar of 300 families in Maryland with a similar ordinance. My neighbors and I are still waiting to see that ordinance from a like community in Maryland. 7, the entire process of exploring a new or expanded ordinance or personnel manual has created serious divisions in our Martin's Additions community. It's not hard to see it by just the amount of people who are here today. The 8, the Ethics Committee and the Village Council has not shown to the community who was responsible for the firing of a former office assistant who was illegally fired for blowing the whistle on our unethical supervisor or manager. 9, the Village Council has not shown at all the legal costs of the use of a private attorney for their work, which come out of our residents' taxes. I hope you would cure that defect. 10, I have reason to believe that the Ethics Committee has been warned not to go down the ordinance road, or they would be individually sued or collectively sued by village residents. I believe this is to be the case.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Goldberg. Your time is up. You've actually gone beyond it, and thank you very much for your comments.
I would like to make one comment.
Yes,
the
please.
Ethics Committee has been threatened by nobody with respect to its work on this project. To make that clear, I don't want to say anything more than that. We've been threatened by nobody.
If I might just make one quick comment, it does seem just from those comments that there may be some mischaracterization as to what actually triggered the evidence that there was a need for ethical reform. But do any other residents have comments?
Lynn Welly would like to comment.
Okay, Lynn. Hi.
Some amongst you council members, the Ethics Committee members, and perhaps some general population of Martin's Addition, you may have a range of and depth of knowledge regarding the proposed amendment to our ethics code as it relates to complaints. You also might have had the benefit of and received legal counsel on this proposed ethics code amendment. You may therefore feel comfortable with what you think you know and how you feel about the legal implications this proposed amendment, if approved, could come into play somewhere down Complaint Boulevard. Surely there are other Martin's Addition folks who do not have a range and depth of knowledge regarding the potential legal consequences implicit in this proposed ethics code amendment as it relates to complaints. The other folks, myself included, are skeptical of and fear. You all know fear of the unknown, fear of how this proposed ethics code amendment as it relates to complaints could somewhere down the road of Complaint Boulevard have a serious negative effect on one's life, financial health, reputation, and legal standing within the law as it applies to the disposition of complaints. I strongly and urgently ask that you defer action on this proposed ethics code amendment as it relates to complaints and allow Martin's Addition folks additional time to consider this matter and communicate their thoughts to the council. After such time, being more informed, may these folks then be fully heard and represented by any vote the council would then take. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Lynn. Anita Defanis? Anita Defanis, I saw you had your hand raised. Are you muted?
Yeah,
And Anita?
I'm asking her to unmute. I asked her to unmute, so it should just.
Okay.
There we go.
Now can, okay.
I'll
now
restart
can you hear
the
me?
timer.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Thank you to the council for holding these hearings. And I'd like to actually thank Mark Efron and Lori Mitchell and Debbie Rommel, and also to Todd Mann, who was the liaison to the Ethics Committee. Mark said that they'd been at this for a few months. I'm sure it felt more like 5 years. This was a very long process. These folks worked countless hours as volunteers, and we all know that volunteers work without remuneration. In addition, they took a lot of heat, and we're still hearing some of that. And that has, I should identify myself. I'm sorry, I'm Anita Defanis, and I live on Bradley Lane, where I've lived for 42 years. I thought I was the oldest resident, but I see Mr. Goldberg has been here even longer. So I can no longer call myself the village elder. These volunteers have really spent countless hours trying to bring forth an ethics ordinance that reflects good governance. And I think we need to remember that. It isn't that we can't disagree on how it's done, but certainly I don't think we can disagree that it hasn't had enough exposure. I think it has had quite a bit of exposure. I think we can disagree about some of the things in it. We may do that. But what has bothered me very much about some of this is the civil discourse and the low level of discourse that I have not seen in my 42 years in the community. It's really very sad. So I think I would urge people to be civil. The other thing that has happened, and Mark alluded to this, is that some of the comments have taken the ordinance out of context or just plain distorted them. And I'm sorry to say, I believe this is intentional so that they can bring forth some red herrings. That said, I think Mark has clearly explained what the ordinance is and what it is not. I do not fear that one of my neighbors is going to report me because they think I'm doing something illegal. I mean, get serious. I also think that once this ordinance is passed, it won't be needed. The fact of the matter is, it is needed now because in the past, the recent past, there have been transgressions that have not been addressed because there was not a process to address them. With a ethics ordinance, those transgressions, I think, will stop because there will be a process to address them. I think the ordinance is straightforward, and I think we need to pass it now. And I would hope that any council member who believes in good governance, particularly that which is based on strong ethics underpinnings, would vote in favor of this ordinance. I really hope we see a unanimous vote to support the ordinance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Phil Norman? Phil?
Hi, all.
Hi.
I read Susan's explanation that came around today of the ordinance, and I want to say that I thought it was coherent, cogent, and convincing.
Thank you.
I think it absolutely laid out your position and showed that this ordinance can address the problem it sets out to address. And I think we should make that part clear. I think Mark and Anita, there was no intent on anybody's side to make mistakes on purpose as we discuss this. And absolutely, there have been mistakes made. But I think the question is not so much, does this ordinance do what it intends to do, solve the problem it intends to create? I think what most of us are concerned about when we're talking past each other is on the question of the unintended consequences it could carry. It's like those science fiction movies where the scientist in the beginning creates some device to take care of a problem, and people say, yeah, but what if this falls into the wrong hands? And at 45 minutes of the movie, sure enough, it does. And hilarity ensues. I think the question that we're all concerned about is certainly not the intent of anybody on the Ethics Committee now to misuse this, but the understanding that there will be others to come and that they could use this, they could use this in different ways than you would. When you talk about the ordinance having specific provisions that provide for a dismissal of frivolous or inconsequential complaints, unelected officials, who we don't know who they are yet, will be the ones to decide what's frivolous, to decide what bias is. And so those are the concerns we're raising, not the question of your intent, but the question of, is the problem that you're solving worth the unintended consequences? Now, in an email to all of you, I said, we can't judge that. You have found it not possible to tell us, for confidentiality reasons, what the problems are in the past that you're addressing. Todd Mann assured me that they would not have called out the fire department had they not smelled a lot of smoke. And I believe that, but we have no way to evaluate that, only you do. So you have two problems you can solve tonight. You can solve the problem of bias, or you can solve the problem of the division that this has caused for all of us. The animosity and the hurt that it's caused on both sides. And unfortunately, you can't vote for both. And so all we're asking is to ask you one more time before you vote to evaluate whether or not these problems that you can't tell us about are so serious as to warrant both the division it's created and to open the possibility of the unintended consequences that you might be allowing to occur. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Okay, would anyone else like to address this?
Susan, Gary Glickman has a symbolic hand up.
Hey, Gary.
Hey.
You have the floor symbolically.
Thank you. And thank you, Arthur, for noticing that. So first of all, I'd like to thank Mark and the rest of the committee and the council for addressing this and for bringing it to a public hearing. You know, as a former federal official, I look at this in the light of what I had to sign and go through to get vetted and go through that process. And this is fairly benign. What it basically says is that if you have a real or possible conflict of interest, disclose it. Tell us about it, and maybe recluse yourself. And if you don't, and we find you guilty, the worst we can do to you is tell you you can't be a volunteer. Doesn't seem all that onerous to me. And it seems like what it really does is it supports a culture of ethics and good government, which I think Martin's additions should certainly be endorsing. You know, as one of the previous speakers said, hopefully it's never used, but should it come up, why not have it? It doesn't seem like that big an issue that needs to be debated ad infinitum. And so I would support passing this. I don't see any real issues in it. I don't see where there are potential unintended consequences, frankly. An unintended consequence, what's the worst that could happen is that somebody comes forth with a complaint that is found to be frivolous. Well, that proves the value of having this ordinance. If you didn't have it, you'd have to go through some arduous process to figure out, well, what do we do about it and have no precedent. This at least sets the standards. And I have faith in our voters and in our capability in the future that if there are abuses and we need to change it, we can do that. We're not that, we're not the village. We're not going to stand on our ground and not make changes to it in the future. So I would support it. I want to thank you all for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you, Gary. Would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else?
Just go ahead and say.
Has her hand up.
Yeah.
Okay. Please state your name and street for the record.
You're
Who are you waiting for, me?
No. I thought there's two people.
Somebody else that has their.
I think it's Diane.
Diane,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Like Everett's.
Hi, I'm Diane Everett, and I live on Raymond Street. Just a short comment. It's my understanding that all the information about what transpired is available on the public record. Susan, is that correct? I might be wrong. I don't know. I thought that, if anyone wants to know what actually happened.
I guess anyone would need to know what they're looking for.
Okay.
But I suppose those records, residents are able to obtain records of
meetings, for example.
Meetings and,
right.
Yes, emails that are transmitted.
Yeah.
Between committee or council officials and other individuals.
Maybe if people are concerned about what transpired, it would behoove them to do that. I trust it, honestly, that you knew what you were doing, and I'm voting for the change in our ethics. So, and I appreciate all the work that all of you have done, and you've worked really hard, and thank you for that.
Thanks, Diane.
Sure.
Okay, and I think Larry Wasson had a comment.
Yes. So in the listserv, Peter Kahn wrote an opinion, and he's a really good lawyer, and I absolutely agree with his points that as written, there is no impartiality that's being utilized. The vague and barely defined offenses invites abuse of the process, and I don't feel that the ordinance is anywhere near ready for adoption, and I would ask that you do not approve it at this time.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to opine?
Naomi has her hand up.
Naomi.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Naomi Nyerman. I'm on Quincy Street. I have one comment and one question. Earlier, either Ron or Mark said that this is the proceedings, the Ethics Committee is not subject to criminal law, but I have the question as to whether it's subject to civil law. So my question is, can you find someone guilty of, if you find them guilty at all, of being against the law on a civil basis? And the other comment I have is this has been much discussed and much publicized in the village, but not enough people. Residents have been engaged. And for me, a change in any ordinance should have a much more inclusive process in place for engaging the rest of the village, perhaps as a referendum, perhaps in other ways where more people weigh in on this pivotal decision that the council is about to make. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
May I, just in terms of, I can answer with respect to the ethics code, the question. The code, the ethics portion of the code, which is what we reviewed, at this point, the only consequence is, I think as Mr. Glickman said, is to be recused from a particular decision, or in the worst case, to be removed from your office. But the remedy has to be as narrow as possible to suit the issue. I don't know if there are other provisions somewhere else in the code that are pre-existing that could lead to other consequences. I'm not aware of them. But remember also in the prior code, there were potential criminal provisions, which we, and actually after a lot of community input, took out because we thought they were not necessary.
Okay, do we have?
So, would you like me to respond as well and maybe able to add?
Yes, please.
Sure. So under the current code, there are civil penalties and criminal penalties. Under state law, a municipality can, by ordinance, determine what violations of its code are civil infractions or criminal infractions. If there's a criminal infraction, those must be prosecuted by the state's attorney. And as Mr. Efron noted, the criminal sanctions are being removed from the code. And the civil infraction, which is basically a fine, and under state law, municipalities can issue fines for violations of their code, and those are civil infractions. But those two are being removed from the current code. So to make it doubly clear, if this ordinance were to pass, I would just suggest we add an additional sentence to section 4204, which is our enforcement provision, to say enforcement shall be limited to the provisions of this chapter and shall not include penalties under chapter 3 of the code. Chapter 3 of the code says the council can, by ordinance, determine what the fines are for different sections. So if we add that additional sentence, it would just make it doubly clear that there can be no civil penalty, no fine for a violation. The only sanction would be, we're either going to ask you to recuse yourself from this particular matter because you may not be able to fairly make a decision, or you're going to be removed from office if the infraction was a little more serious. And that's the sole remedy as intended by the current draft.
Okay, does anyone else?
Hi, Susan Kahn. I had something to say.
Okay, Susan.
Hi. Susan Kahn, I live on Bradley Lane. And I think that one of the problems with the proposed ordinance is that we're being asked to take on faith that the intentions of whoever might use it in the future are good. I certainly believe that it is intended well by the members of the committee who've worked hard on it and the council. But I think someone else earlier talked about unintended consequences. And I think when we're being asked to take on faith that in the future, lawyers in consultation with our council or committees would be able to distinguish between petty grievances and serious grievances, but we're never even told an example of what a type of petty grievance would be. What motivated this? What was an example? If it's so important that that be confidential, I'm concerned about that because it sets up a process of adjudicating it or discussing it that is itself justified as being private because we don't want to smear or bring out into the open accusations that could hurt someone's reputation. Well, it could also hurt someone's reputation who's in a political position, who's saying libelous and defamatory things about someone. And so there's a lot of there could be mixed motives and reasons to have a secret, quiet process. But until we can really hear examples of what this is designed to deal with, why it was established, what's the difference between a petty grievance and a serious? If it's so obvious that we have to take that on faith, then certainly someone should be able to give us an example. I think that the go-to here to resolve a conflict within our village is let's get legal advice. Let's get our village attorney to help us decide what other special counsel might help us adjudicate this. A lot of HOAs, homeowners associations in our county, go to conflict resolution centers go to outside mediation to help resolve conflicts. And then there's a conversation where people talk about it. But I think we've created a process here that's just unthinkingly kind of knee-jerk. We've relied on attorneys who are unelected representatives because they are supposedly more impartial or neutral. But I don't think, I think it's good to aim for that when you take an oath of office. But when you're serving as a resident in a volunteer position, we're serving because we care, and we care a lot about what happens to our home, our yard, our safety, our health, the aesthetics of where we are. We don't want to be totally disinterested. We are interested. We care if there's a sidewalk in front of our home, if there's a tree that gets cut down in a neighbor's. So we have reasons to be partial. We are not always aiming for impartiality. So there's a certain type of, I think, assumption about why we're being impartial or partial. There are certain unstated things that are making us rely on lawyers more. And I would encourage you to rethink or look at other alternatives for resolving disputes within our county, because it concerns me that we haven't been able to find this example in many other municipalities. And the disharmony it has already caused, and I expect will cause more of, is obvious. It's clear already there's disharmony, the idea that one person judges another and from one committee, etc. We're electing people to represent our interests, not to kind of slander or do libelous things towards others. And I'm really concerned about potential conflict that can come out of it. So I would encourage hesitancy and not voting in favor of this passage right now. Thank you.
Ron, do you want to correct the misimpression regarding no surrounding communities having any similar provisions, i.e. Somerset? Or I can, or Lori, you're very familiar with the Somerset provision with their ordinance.
Ron, do you want to go? I know you brought it up. I brought it up within the committee, but Ron, you might be more familiar with that.
Sure, yeah, and we've talked about this at prior meetings. I'll try to keep it short, although recognizing there are a lot of folks new at this meeting, hadn't heard the information before. So I represent 9 other local governments in the area, and it is true that most communities don't have a regulation with respect to impartiality. Most communities have a conflicts of interest code, and that applies usually only to financial conflicts of interest. Somerset, however, they do hold their election committee members to a higher standard and require them to be neutral, and they have a process for reviewing whether neutrality has been breached. I will say that just because other communities don't have on their books right now a process for dealing with questions of partiality or impartiality, doesn't mean that it's not a good idea. It might just mean that those issues haven't come up in those other jurisdictions yet, because the law is often responsive. I will note that, as we've discussed a little at prior meetings, the Maryland Constitution says that folks that hold offices of public trust have to take the oath, and the oath includes a duty to act impartially. And that leads me to think, well, to whom does that apply? Well, we know, based on the verbiage of the constitutional oath, it applies to offices of public trust. So that probably means it already applies to our statutory appointees, the tree supervisor, election committee members. And so I think that's why we see at least election committee members, election supervisors, tellers, and the like are subject to some sort of higher standard. I appreciate and I regret that if folks want to hear examples. I will say that It has been a struggle to walk the fine line. The Village of Martin's Additions has been subjected to divisive issues over the years, much more than my other clients. And thankfully, those issues and complaints are behind us. And I want to leave them behind us. I don't want to open up new wounds. I'm sorry, I don't want to open up old wounds. And so, I really don't think it would be constructive to talk about past complaints because we are past them. Suffice it to say, well, and it's also true that the prior complaints were unproven. It's also true that they were uninvestigated because there was no process to investigate them. So I can't give you an opinion as to whether breaches of the duty of impartiality in the past actually occurred. But what I will say is that the complaints were serious enough in the eyes of the complaining party that they warranted attention. And if the assertions, as they had been made, were factually true, I would say from a legal standpoint, they did warrant investigation, if they were true. Again, I'm not passing any judgment in that regard. I've struggled with coming up with hypotheticals. I don't want to give you the facts of the actual complaints, but can I give you hypotheticals that are close to the facts that might give you an idea of what we've had to deal with in the past? And I find that's difficult too, because it's hard to come up with a hypothetical where the folks involved in the prior complaints might not think we're talking about them, because this is a small town and the complaining parties and the subjects of the complaint are still around, of course. And, some are still active one way or another. And, so for that reason, it's hard to discuss. But let me say, and hopefully this will be sufficient, that there has been somewhat of a common theme. The complaints have not been frivolous. The complaints have generally related to disagreements. Sometimes they're political disagreements. Sometimes there are strained relationships. But the common theme is that the complaining party thinks that person A is making decisions that impact person B because there's a strained relationship between person A and B. And there might be assertions that someone's using their official office to make decisions that are going to harm somebody else. And hopefully that's enough. I don't need to say more. Now, on confidentiality, complaints are kept confidential generally because if they're frivolous, we don't want to republish them, right? We want them to die as submitted if they're garbage. If the respondent wants it released in order to correct the record in case someone else has found out about it, that possibility is available. Unintended consequences, that's an attorney's worst nightmare. But, I will say that currently someone can submit a frivolous complaint. I don't think having the ordinance in place increases that risk. Because that risk, albeit remote, already exists. But now with the ordinance, we'd have a clear process to review that complaint. Whereas right now, everything has to be resolved by the council. And given that we are a small town, more often than not, the council might have some role or might be the reason for the complaint. And it's difficult for the council to review complaints if there's not a quorum of the council available, because a complaint might involve the council, or the complaint stems from a decision made by the council, where the council then says, well, gosh, we we probably won't be viewed as impartial if we weigh in on this, because the complaining party or the respondent may have hard feelings with us against that. Does this set up likelihood of division or animosity? And, there's a lot of folks here tonight, more than most meetings. And this is good government. It's great to have all these comments. I will say that there has been, again, that unfortunate history of division in the village. And hopefully this ordinance would be a way to address it and to get past it, because there have been reoccurring divisions. And maybe that's because prior events haven't been properly addressed.
I really disagree.
Okay, Susan, do you want a quick?
I did, yeah, very quick. I just wanted to say that we were asked for comparable or similar ordinances in neighboring jurisdictions, and we were given the example of Somerset, which is fine, but you did clarify, Ron, if I understood, that Somerset relates to its election committee. It holds them to be neutral. It does not. We are writing an ordinance here that is all of the staff, all of our committees, all of our task forces, the tree supervisor. It's very different. It's totally different in kind. It's apples and oranges.
Great point. Yeah, that's a great point. And let me also point out that currently council members and employees are already subject to the requirements. What we would add with this ordinance basically are appointees, committee members, and the tree supervisor.
Okay, thank you.
That is unique, but also I would ask folks to note that a complaint has to relate to impartiality in the exercise of a duty. So that limits, I think, what complaints would actually be raised, because there would have to be an improper decision in the exercise of an official duty. Now, what official duties do the social committee or the welcome committee have that might actually result in a complaint? I think that's pretty limited. Really, I think where the meat and potatoes are, like in other communities, is the statutory duties, like the election committee, tree supervisor. I think that's where complaints are most likely going to be, not against the village weatherman, although he's not an official appointee.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Do we have other comments?
Holly Worthington had her hand up. Also, Brian Oliver.
Okay. Holly, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Holly Worthington, Turner Lane. I think the context for me of the way this ordinance has evolved is what's most concerning. It seemed that when the sign ordinance came out quickly, which was a reaction to a small incident, it seemed to me that the idea that if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, that for the many members of the council, if something needs changing, then it looks like an ordinance. And I'm not accusing anyone, I'm just talking, Susan. That I'm sorry to talk to you, forgive me. That method, because the first thing that happened here was that the council asked Ron Bolt to come up with an ordinance, rather than we do research on what other communities do. We find out what other communities have done to resolve issues like this, and then make a decision about what's the best solution. In the course of the past 6 meetings, the villagers have asked over and over again, can we have a public forum on this issue? Can we do research first? And instead, it was, no, we'll write this ordinance up and we'll see, because the ethics committee was doing what they were asked to do, and they worked their tails off doing it. But the options have always been to do something other than an ordinance. But it seems to me that the way this has been pushed through, that it was never the intention to do anything but have this ordinance. And that makes me so concerned, I can't tell you. And it's not that the unintended consequence is that if someone wants power and they really want to have an ordinance, then they may use it for whatever their own purpose is. And I have no idea what that purpose might be. No idea. And I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I just don't know. But I can tell you that the trajectory of the way this has evolved has been absolutely, we're making an ordinance and that's where this is headed. Despite meeting after meeting after meeting of us asking for research, asking for other things, asking for alternatives, all of that. So I throw that out here for the rest of the community to consider. I am absolutely against this ordinance. I think it's divisive, and I think it's very easy for anyone to accuse anyone of impartiality. People say that I like one of my sons better than the other, or vice versa. We all could get accused of impartiality, and if you are in a position of power, that is a very loosey-goosey term. So if all this ordinance does is make it so that we're exercising authority over the election committee and other committees, I humbly suggest that it will make it very unlikely that people will feel like volunteering unless they love they're in cahoots with those in power.
That's a very interesting view of volunteerism. I think Brian Oliver wanted to speak. Brian? Yes.
Okay. Brian Oliver on Bethel Street. I was going to take.
Actually, if there's a way you might be able to adjust your sound, your audio.
Can you hear me better now?
No, your microphone's blurred.
Yeah.
There's a lot of static, Mr. Oliver.
Okay. If there's any other comments, I'll call into my phone right over the line.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, sorry. Anyone else in the meantime?
Yes, I would like to speak.
Anyone who hasn't spoken? Okay, Marty?
Thank you, I'll be brief. I've been in public service for decades and do a lot of rulemaking and legislation in government. And I have, as I think everyone here knows, been quite vocal about saying that what we need here is a good complaint resolution process within a volunteer manual or handbook, which is normally where these things are. I think we need due process. I commend the Ethics Committee for their responsiveness to the suggestions that I and others made about improving the due process provisions here. I just think that this is in the wrong place, that making it a legal violation, calling bias a violation of village law, is unduly harsh, and that in fact it should be handled as an administrative process. I like the process, I think that the provisions that have been spelled out here are fine, but I think that it has to really go where it belongs, which is in a as Holly said, not an ordinance, but in a very good volunteer manual. And a number of volunteers, experienced longtime volunteers here in the village, have offered to help draft a volunteer manual. And I think that Jeff Goldsberg's point right at the beginning about volunteer manuals being binding is absolutely correct. They certainly, in my experience, are considered binding. And there's no need to make it part of a legal code. I'm concerned that when you have somebody accused of violating an ethics law, they will in fact lawyer up. And this could become very expensive. And I'm an economist, I care about numbers, I look at money. And I think this could, again, have many unintended consequences, one of which could be an extremely expensive set of litigation for the village if this is ever used. Because I suspect anyone accused of violating the law with an ethics charge would in fact lawyer up immediately, and we could have countersuits and all kinds. It could get very expensive. So again, this comes from my experience in public service, that this belongs in a very good volunteer manual. I would be more than happy to help write that myself. And I appreciate the due process. I think all of it should simply get moved from the ordinance code level back down to the administrative level. And I have one final question. What happens if the Ethics Committee is the subject of the complaint? I'll leave it at that, and I thank everyone who's participated in this conversation. Thank you all.
Can I answer that question, Susan, since it was discussed?
Yes.
So at one of our earlier meetings, one of the early meetings of the Ethics Committee, an open meeting, that subject was discussed, and it was determined that first of all, I can say without violating any confidences, I am unaware in the past of any complaints being made against anybody in the ethics committee. But if there is a complaint against the ethics committee, the person who is complained about obviously would recuse himself or herself. That would leave at least 2 people on the committee, and there would be a quorum. If that, for some reason, they had to recuse themselves so there could not be a quorum, it would revert to the council, which we have heard has the implicit ability to take action on its own. But this was something that was discussed at the time, and it was determined that that was sort of the best process to handle this.
Susan, this is Jeff Blander. I just had a quick question for Ron based upon Mark's response. Ron, so just the definition of quorum for the village council is also 2 members? Is that the same?
It's 3 for the village council.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So there is a high bar in order to convince first the ethics committee and then the council to proceed.
Right.
For those who are concerned about a runaway jury, as Ron says. Okay,
Susan,
does anyone else wish to speak?
Susan, I think Brian is now on the phone. So
Brian.
Yeah.
Brian,
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm going to get my kids who ever mess with my computer. First of all, Susan, I want to take a moment to thank the committee and council. And on behalf of the private citizen, I want to apologize to the committee and council for I think have taken an unfair beating by a small portion of the community in recent times, whether it be this ordinance or another. I think there's been, I'm actually appalled at the tone of the discord shown by a few small neighbors who are, what I feel, intentionally distorting the reason for and the content of various ordinances brought forth recently. I think it's the way that the community has become divided unfairly, in my point, is just shocking to me. I wanted to address a couple of points I've heard talked about tonight. First of all, those who say there's no need for this ordinance. We already have an ordinance. It seems to me that the committee is the council is trying to fix it. Regarding the matters of confidentiality that come up tonight, I don't know about them, but I trust the council when they say they can't tell us. I'm married to a corporate director of HR. If it is an HR matter, I'm sure you can't tell us about it, but I also know that this is government, and if there's somebody who's so hell-bent in finding out this information, feel free to go file a Freedom of Information Act. And until you have that information, don't make accusations against the council, against the committees that are working hard as a volunteer for us. I know there's also those who say that this is being passed too fast, but I've also heard it's been brought up at 6 meetings. It has been public, it has been posted, it has followed the process set forth by the village charter and state law. The council is following what they have to do to fix an ordinance. And for those who say there's going to be unintentional consequences, the ordinances can be changed if there's a problem. The council is changing this ordinance to fix the problem they found. If they need to do it again in the future, it can be done then. And at the end, I'd just like to urge to pass the ordinance. And let's get back to being a civil community to each other.
Thank you. Thank you. Peter Kahn?
Yes, thank you. I just have one concern, and it goes to this discussion of the appearance that other jurisdictions don't have impartiality requirements, or it isn't codified. And many jurisdictions do have conflict of interest laws, but as Ron made clear, almost none of them in our area do, and I believe it's not in the Maryland public ethics law either, that this is codified as an enforceable matter. And I think that there's a reason why conflict of interest laws are common, but impartiality laws are not commonly enforceable. And that is the conflict of interest is a matter that is inherently amenable to evidence and factual assertions and factual evidence. And the intrinsic nature of litigating impartiality or arguing about impartiality is that it goes to the state of mind of the accused. And somehow there has to be some means by which we can divine the state of mind. You know, was the intention of the accused to engage in, favoritism, or was it, was it in some ways based on fact? And I think once the accusation is there, the natural impulse will be to say, oh, well, of course I was being fair. I was looking at this reason and that reason. I think impartiality is just intrinsically difficult to have evidence about. And it's not impossible, but I think what really concerns me here is that there are no standards of evidence that are in the proposed ordinance that can help us understand, in a fair and impartial manner, what the intent, or what the state of mind of the accused was. I think of fraudulent behavior, for example, and there are badges of fraud in the law that help a court decide whether the behavior was intentionally fraudulent or not. Similarly, I think there should be some effort to clarify standards of evidence that should be used in making these accusations, because while I have no doubt of the fair-mindedness of the people on the ethics committee and the current council, I think that the future is intrinsically unpredictable, and the possibility that this will be unfairly applied and that inappropriate assumptions or inferences about the state of mind of the accused person will be made at some time in the future. And that's why I believe that this is not a bad effort. And I can understand the motivation for this, but I do believe that there should be standards that are brought to bear so that we will be able to discern in an unbiased and reliable manner whether the state of mind, in fact, was to exhibit favoritism or to instead be acting out of some other motive. And that's my concern.
Okay, thank you, Peter. As for the fact that the future is uncertain, we can all agree to that, which actually kind of lends strength or support for the fact of a clearly delineated procedure, I think. Mark, if you would not mind addressing the fact that the Maryland public ethics law doesn't address impartiality. Are you still with us?
I'm still here.
Yeah, good.
I think so. The Maryland state ethics law has a statement at the very beginning of it that I read earlier that does address impartiality. And I'll read it again, but the General Assembly, recognizing that our system of representative government is dependent on maintaining the highest trust by people in their government officials, finds and declares that the people have a right to be assured that impartiality and independent judgment of those officials shall be maintained. And there's also a provision to the effect, and I don't have it in front of me, that is supposed to be broadly interpreted. I have read through Maryland opinions by the Maryland by the administrative body that issues opinions. And there are a number of opinions that cite to the provision that I have just read as a reason for making a decision one way, issuing an opinion one way or the other. So that, even though there's no definition beyond that statement, it has been used by the Maryland Board as cited as a reason for making a decision one way or the other.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Do we have comments from anyone who hasn't spoken yet?
There's,
Yes,
I'm sorry, there's Margolis, Brodsky, and iPad who have their hands up. There's somebody else just jumped in.
Hi, yes, this is Ben Dunn for Taylor Street. Might as well jump in while I can.
Jump in.
I was ambivalent to this ordinance until Ron said something. I believe he said he works for 9 municipalities, and this is the most divisive municipality. It is my belief that a divisive ordinance will not fix a divisive municipality. Second thing, I'm concerned with the opaqueness of the council in terms of what is the impetus for this.
What is the impetus? Did you say? I'm sorry.
Yes. Why are we doing this
Right,
ordinance?
I understand impetus.
And the opinion that we should file a FOIA for a neighborhood organization, I find to be unconscionable.
No, I don't think that's what anyone suggested. But
Somebody literally said in support of this argument that we should file a FOIA.
I think there has been a lot of misinformation. Certainly I heard a lot just tonight about what actually led to, what was the impetus for this proposed ordinance.
So
And
without me filing a FOIA,
it bears no resemblance to what actually motivated the search for a better procedure.
okay, ma'am, then what causes the procedure, if you can tell us? Without
I would say this, since there has been a reference to how unfair it is that it's confidential, the person who was the subject of the complaints, which were not allowed to proceed because we didn't have a procedure, could certainly waive confidentiality. That would be one way of actually allowing a complete and open discussion.
But didn't you say earlier that everything was on the record in previous meeting minutes? Why can you not just?
No, that is, no, but I think that I was addressing the question of whether public records can be obtained. Public records can be obtained, whether they're minutes or emails.
So if it's public records, then why can you not tell us?
Because our council has asked that we protect the confidentiality of the person.
And why is that?
So some disputes are reflected in meeting minutes, as one person commented. Other complaints have not been made public and are not reflected in the minutes and are kept confidential because they haven't been investigated.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have other questions? Thanks, Ron. Other comments, rather, sorry.
Yeah, there, Margolis, Brodsky, and iPad.
Okay.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm Aletta Margolis, and I'm speaking on behalf of my family, Michael Brodsky and Isabel and Mira Brodsky as well. I believe we should certainly have a process for addressing issues of impartiality or conflict of interest. I am strongly opposed, however, to an ordinance to address this issue. It's like killing a cockroach with a sledgehammer. It will kill the cockroach, but it will also create a lot of collateral damage. I heard Ron say, and I appreciate this, he doesn't want to open up old wounds. And I agree, but I believe that passing this ordinance will not only reopen old wounds, it will further open the wounds that we are witnessing tonight and have witnessed in discussions around this ordinance in the past months. We live here on Turner Lane. We've lived here since 1997. I've run a nonprofit for the past 26 years, and I serve on the boards of over a dozen nonprofits and corporations. And I've never come across an ordinance like this one in any of the boards I've been a part of. Each board I've served on has, of course, had a conflict of interest policy, and that serves this purpose. As Anita pointed out early on, in the past few months, there have been she observes the past few months have had some of the most contentious discourse that she has seen between council members and other residents in many years, or perhaps ever. And I would just respectfully submit to all of us to think for a moment, that fact in and of itself is a real red flag. This proposed ordinance has already served to divide us. Imagine what will happen in our community if it is passed and adopted. I strongly urge the council to reject this ordinance. And I will say also, I've been tracking just my own ability, best of my ability, but tonight we've heard from, based on my count, 15 people, 5 of whom support the ordinance, 10 of whom do not support the ordinance. And I think that's a very, very important note for our elected officials to take. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if you're counting. I don't typically look at chat, but since we seem to keep a running tally, there is a chat from Alexander Gasquier.
I counted
him.
Yeah, I counted him as supporting the ordinance.
It's a very kind message, so
I counted that as supporting the ordinance.
Thank
and
you.
Again, it's not a scientific count, but I'm doing my best.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else?
Yes, I have a question.
Susan, it's Tiffany Cisna. I was one of the hands that was up, but I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tiffany. Yes, you haven't spoken yet, and we are just doing one crack at the apple tonight.
Okay.
Tiffany, go for it.
Thank you. I am Tiffany Cisna. I live on Bradley Lane. As a former council member, I am aware of some of the matters that have brought about the need for the expanded jurisdiction of the Ethics Committee. And I support this amendment being made to the code. I'm not currently on the council. It's very frustrating for me to still be held to the confidentiality. I can't imagine what the current council members are experiencing. Making this amendment to the code at this time, when to my knowledge, there aren't specific matters on the table before the council or the Ethics Committee, is a best practice, getting the structure in place, not when you're dealing with a specific case. And I'd also note that the discussion over the last few months to this point hasn't seemed to deter folks going forward. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a competitive election this year. And then lastly, we're a municipal government. We're not a nonprofit board. We're not a homeowners association. State law and our charter dictate the process that we follow, and that process has been followed here. And I think, again, it restricts the council's ability to just, speak freely at all times, 3 council members together, and all of a sudden you have a public meeting that's subject to the Open Meetings Act. And I want to remind, folks that there have been more than 10 public meetings in which this has been discussed between the 3 residents, again, our fellow residents who serve on the Ethics Committee, and the 5 of our fellow residents who are on the council. This has been discussed more than 10 times in an open setting. And in each of those meetings, there's been opportunity for resident comment. So I support the council moving forward at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken yet who would like to? And if not, Todd, do we have anyone else before I move on? No one else has their hands up. So Todd, would you like to proceed?
Well, I think it just comes back now to first of all, thank you all to all of you residents for taking the time to show up and to voice your thoughts. So thank you all. This was very, very productive session. So I think that we're at a point now where we come to any further discussion among council members and then decide on a course of action. So if it's all right with you, I'll just kind of go around the table and see what added comments council members have. And Arthur, your hand is up.
Yeah, I have a couple of very minor points. One is that as far as I read the ordinance, the draft, it neither precludes nor preempts the council from doing what is inherently in its right that we've had the right to do all along, which is under the current law, we can dismiss anybody at will. And no procedures, no due process, in a closed hearing with no opportunities for explanation or evidence. We had that in the past and we will continue to have that. So this is not taking away any of the prerogatives that the council now has. And I believe that's correct. Ron and Mark, this does not preclude us or preempt us from doing that. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So I have one modification or suggestion to a small change to the proposed code, and that is to make it applicable only to the what's the term you use, Ron? To the committees that are mentioned by the statutory committees. So I would take out where it says public official or official means all members of the village council, all members of any standing village committee, the tree supervisor, and all persons employed by the village, and remove temporary committees or task force. So that would bring it into alignment with the generalized idea of the standing committees or the constitutional committees. And then I would also suggest, and this would be a separate resolution, and Ron, you've already alluded to this in the past, that these standing committees all take the same oath that the council takes right now. And that is the oath that's established in the state constitution. That's a little bit broader than the one that the committees take now. So I would suggest that this remove the more short-term committees from coverage of this.
All right. Thank you. Other discussion on Arthur's point or any added points? Discussion.
I think removing short-term committees from the scope would be certainly not objectionable. I would not have a problem with that. For one thing, short-term committees would have limited opportunities to act with partiality in a way that would really cause damage. Certainly their duration is limited. I would also just like to raise a couple of other points. First of all, thank you so much to the committee. I know that you all have invested probably hundreds of hours of time in research and meetings. And I think you have created an ordinance that will stand the test of time and that will address those qualms or concerns that were raised in so many of the comments, either verbal or written, over the past weeks and months, 8 months. There's one thing that I think we need to be mindful of, and that is it's not actually the ordinance that is creating the division in the community. Who can object to ethics? I think it's really been it's been a political issue more than an actual factual legal issue, and it's just good government. When I moved here 36 years ago or so, and in the 5.5 years that I've been on the council, I've always expected that people would act in the public interest, not in their own self-interest or in a way that is clearly partial until a year ago, when I learned that our ethics law is inadequate and that we needed to make changes. I believe those changes, while we can't specify precisely what served as the impetus, indicated that we needed to take action, and taking action now while there's not an immediate crisis would seem to just be a reasonable course of action. On a personal note, I think regarding the discourse and the animosity, it would be really wonderful if residents were able to just discuss issues with which they disagree in an informative and informed way, and not resort to hyperbole. I was shocked at the letter that was sent around, even after all these meetings, suggesting that there would be punishment. And I hope that point has been made abundantly clear, that this ordinance does not provide a punitive measure. Having been subjected to that a year ago by a committee chair, I would certainly not wish for anyone to be threatened with a possible $1,000 fine or a possible jail term. That is sort of not what you expect to come out of your public service. And I think that we have had our ethics committee acting with our attorney, with our village attorney, and in consultation with the council, has, I believe, created the best ordinance, with Arthur's possible suggestions that we can achieve.
Jeff or Katya, any comments?
I'll let Jeff speak first. I'm sure he'll want to jump in really quickly.
Thank you so much, Katya. I appreciate that, and thank you, Todd. And I was just going to ask, I promise it's brief, but could I share my screen real quick? That would be helpful.
You should be able. You should be able to now.
Awesome. Bear with me. I see my daughter's PowerPoint on starting a friendship club. I wish I could present that, but we'll hold that off on that for another time. Here we go. Okay. And I'm going to share it, but before I share it, I actually have a question, Ron. It's a serious question. You see behind me over my shoulder? That's a, you see it's kind of like a fuzzy purple sort of thing?
Yes.
Yeah, so I just had a question. It's serious. It's not meant to make fun of the proceedings. It's a serious question. That is a truffula tree. And so my daughter and I have been, for years, been real fans of, Dr. Seuss and the Lorax, and even Halloween, we had a kindness corner. We had truffulas, right? So I'm just curious, we have a tree ordinance coming up later on the agenda. I clearly love trees, and I love truffulas, and I love the Lorax. So do I have to recuse myself? Because I'm telling you right now, I'm not impartial to what I want coming out of that ordinance.
No, you do not.
I don't think he was serious.
I'm very serious, actually, because it was actually an example given at the first ethics committee that I attended, which is an example about trees. So I'm asking a serious question. I'm not impartial. I just want to know, there's a tree ordinance coming up, and so you're saying no, that is true. I don't have to recuse myself.
Correct. And within the intent of the ordinance and the definition of impartiality, there is the notion that impartiality.
Yeah,
I'm still here. I just was sharing my screen for a quick.
Okay. Did you want to go over that before I?
Oh, yeah, let me stop and then, yeah, I'll stop it, we'll finish, and then I'll go through my quick note.
So when you review the tree ordinance, undoubtedly, you are going to use objective criteria and make decisions based on the best interest of the village. Of course, everyone has their own opinions. That's why we have a 5-member council, because different opinions result in good government. And you may have strong feelings about trees, but that doesn't mean your decisions are going to be based on an improper motive or prejudice or bias. And the term bias in that regard means an improper motivation. Your motivation in being an environmental steward is perfectly appropriate, assuming that's what it is.
Great. Thank you. I do appreciate it. And Susan, it was a serious question.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to just bear with me. I'm going to share.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have a couple suggestions too for the language once we get to that.
Great. So I'll make this quick. So these were just a few substantive suggestions. And again, just putting it out there, I think for the public record, and it's been disclosed in a number of correspondences, it's been 4-1, 4-1, 4-1. So again, I want to respect my fellow council members, what their opinions are. I also want to recognize the committee itself that's put in an awful lot of time. I also want to respect the opinions of fellow residents who feel strongly about this. And I just happen to be someone who feels on the other side. So again, we can respect each other and just share our views, and that's how I'm looking at this, and I'll make it very quick. So just some substantive suggestions for other fellow council members. The first, I don't even have to go back that far. I'm just going back to the last open meeting. When we were just talking about the task force, not a standing committee that permanent and the implications for the entire village, a temporary task force that would be collecting and sharing information, there is some very strong opinions voiced by fellow council members around the need for guardrails, meaning the idea that the council needs to be the ones who are shaping and guiding how that task force actually manages itself. And then also the idea of a general complaint procedure that, this is focused on a particular very specific area of the oath of office, the impartiality, and ethics. But the question is, does really every complaint that can come forward fall under those buckets? And if not, are folks going to be trying to fit like a round, peg into a square hole? And then finally, the idea of avoiding conflicts and conflicts of interest. So here's just, and then residents have also brought up these similar things. So just my couple thoughts for others out there. First, I say small in quotes is, I think the guardrail piece is very straightforward. I truly believe, and again, this is my opinion, that all complaints should first go to the elected council for triaging. Pretty straightforward, right? I think this provides the needed guardrails. And Ron, no offense, I truly, respect you. You bring a lot of experience, but I think it avoids some extra attorney fees, which I'd like to give to Mana, right? And just the idea we've got guardrails, right? There are complaints. There may be times that we don't have a quorum, but many times we do. And I feel as an elected official, if there is something that is that serious and egregious, I would like to hear that and discuss it in either open and closed meeting with my fellow council members. And then if, we can't handle it or we need that extra muscle, I'm open to the idea of having some body ethics or whatever to review. But I feel that as a guardrail, all complaints should first come to the council. The other piece about that, it creates the catch-all. Because I'm still don't see how there's a general complaint procedure, and I'm feeling like what happens in a month, 3 months. Tiffany brings up a great point. The best time to do it is to do it when you don't have something. But what happens if something comes up where it's not impartiality or ethics? What are we going to do? Are we going to come back to this process again, and we're going to go through and make more amendments to the code? Then the other piece, this idea of conflict or lack of quorum, again, it's this idea, then you refer it. I think it seems like a very reasonable thing to do. And then by doing this procedure over the weeks and months ahead, Peter Kahn and others, I think, have brought up some real substantive points, which is, again, this is my opinion, is I believe that this needs a little bit more work. I'd be happy to work on it. And, really looking at a little bit more of guardrails and guidelines around impartiality and ethics. I just don't think it's shovel ready, but that's my opinion. And because there's nothing pending, the idea of setting up a complaint procedure that goes first to the council alleviates and takes out the air pressure because we've got our procedures in place, and then we have a little bit more time to think through the implications of really giving this empowerment to a non-elected body. The other quick thing, which I think is important, and again, this is no by any means an inference or a slight to anyone who served on the current committee. Mark, I know you and I share actually an alumni together, so I have great respect for you and everything that you do. But I feel because of the change in scope and the idea of the seriousness and the implications that this new expanded jurisdiction gives, I feel that we should have a call for volunteers and look at CVs and look at background, and maybe it's the same composition, but I do feel that we should go through a process that is rigorous and due diligent and is similar to when we stand up other task force or other committees when they're new or different scope. So very quickly, and again, I promise only another minute or two. And Ron, again, I just want to show you, I have great respect. I've always, we haven't engaged that often, but I've always had a deep respect for your opinions. Here's the background research. Now, I'm putting the date because the date is December 17th was when this research, was showed in public, keeping in mind that this first started in August. And I truly believe, again, my opinion, that if we had this at the beginning in August and we had a public forum among residents to discuss these options, we would be in a very different place. In fact, I believe this would be a nothing burger. I think that this would have been resolved in the minimum period of whatever it is, the 60 days or 90 days. But again, because we went through it in a certain way, it's created this significant bubble of anxiety. And I look at your research, frankly, and I agree with about 3 or 4 of the pieces that you have here. The only thing that I'm not totally for is the idea of number 2, where you're creating the empowerment that goes directly to the ethics committee. I truly believe we need guardrails, that the council reviews it, and then if there's an exception, we refer. So I hope that other fellow council members, again, I know that you have your opinions, and I respect it, but this is how I look at this. And again, I want to just put out there for others, I served for a number of years on the Harvard School of Public Health Ethics Committee board. And I also had been, a compliance officer where I traveled in places on sub-Saharan Africa and visited sites. So I take it very seriously. And so please don't take my comments as being flippant or not appreciating ethics. I really do. I just feel that there's a different approach. And then one final, just another minute, please bear with me. So again and again, I think this shows, I just want to show to everyone here, this is very quick and something really I'm going to think deeply about. But I've been on the council now for roughly, I guess, about 10 months. And I put this out here as more of a lessons learned for me. Because again, I want to respect Mark Efron and others in terms of how they view things. And I know that they, in their opinions, feel that they followed a process that really resonates strongly in terms of just everything is ticked and tied. But I just put this up here because, again, I have, from my vantage point, a bit of a different perspective. And I'm only going to highlight a few things. But this is really July 1st when I had my orientation. I'm just going to point out a couple things. And this is important because it gets to the training manuals and other things. So, Ron, again, I think you know, and Niles, you know, we had the orientation on July 1st, right? We talked about, you know, I raised my arm, I took the oath, I've taken other oaths. It was great. I was very excited. Taking an oath should be an exciting thing for anyone who is in this village. But I'm just putting out there, you know, there wasn't a training manual. There weren't other council members there to help onboard. There wasn't even a formal agenda. And the reason why this is important is because there are things that around the purview of this new ethics committee around, you know, did you do something ethical? I mean, there were things that in the course of the heat of the moment between council members where we've thrown accusations about, were you acting ethically? And if things aren't exactly codified, if you don't have SOPs around what meeting minutes are expected to be, if you don't have SOPs around, you know, other pieces of this around, for example, how do you draft and how do you finalize an agenda for an open meeting? I believe that there are some things that have to complement this so that there is real codified procedure that then could go hand in hand with the guidelines and the guardrails of ethics. And just a few more things, bear with me. It'll take just another minute. So again, I want to point this out, and again, Mark and others, just appreciating why the air pressure and tire pressure has been so high. So on August 20th, that was when there was an overwhelming response of this community, almost the numbers that we had, but then that day I think we had about 65, today a little bit over 50. Around that, we had a withdrawn proposal for the sign ordinance. And we talked about communicating. Phil, you know, you're going to New York. I hope I can visit you, but I'm going to miss you here in the community. But how do we communicate better to each other? What's the process? How do we improve that engagement? And the reason why I say this is when I showed up at that August 27th, the first ethics committee meeting, I remember it was the summer. I have the icon there, right? I was with my daughter at the pool. I figure, again, nothing burger. I'm going to hear what, you know, I heard an introduction of making a motion to have this committee move forward to look at new expansion of jurisdiction. And I was in the closed meetings, right? And I'm not going to talk, but I'm just saying that I was surprised at that happening. But I said, you know what? I'll wait until the September council meeting. Just a few more minutes, Susan. I appreciate it. I'm almost done. I'll wait until the September council meeting, and we'll talk about this in open meeting, right? We'll have the minutes of that committee meeting so we can talk about this and then what are really the next steps. But again, that's where perhaps, like I said, I'm a newbie. You know, I honestly perhaps didn't know the best process or procedure, but those meeting minutes were not posted before we had that discussion. There was a direction that, Susan, I see you're making faces. That you can look it up. It's in the minutes for the ethics committee meeting on August 27th were not made available before that council meeting. And in those meeting minutes, when they came out, there was a complaint by a resident about the concern for this. So again, what I'm saying is, in terms of lessons learned, I think the valuable thing that has come out of this for me, and I think it's also been for the committee, because going forward from that, there were improved processes, you know, and again, I'm almost done here, but then in, you know, October 14th, that was the first time we looked at that draft as in an open meeting. And most residents were there for over 2 hours until they had an ability to comment in that meeting. And then the very next day, October 15th, I remember it well because it was my birthday. It was my 50th birthday. And I was there for that discussion. And again, there was a motion to potentially introduce this, even though that meeting less than 24 hours before, with many substantive inputs from residents, was not made available in meeting minutes. And again, I'm just putting it out there. I'm not saying there's anything done that was wrong. I'm just showing the process and why, from my perspective, I couldn't get my arms around how this was considered a process that I could stand behind. So I see it as a lessons learned. And then finally, just in wrapping up, I've already talked about it, you know, the background research came out first in the December council meeting. And, you know, we also then saw, I think, I really respect Arthur in terms of the ordinance process and several sessions of this open discussion. And just in the very last session, again, the idea of timing matters. I truly believe that after that inflection point in August, when we had the sign ordinance and there was all this learning, and I really think there was goodwill. I really believe that coming out of that meeting, the community was ready to work with this council on a new way forward. And I think that by having them move directly in less than a week later into moving into this new process with this new ordinance, it sucked the air out and it created a lot of pressure. So, you know, those are my lessons learned. And the bottom line is, I hope that going forward, when we consider new ordinances, we can take this all in the good spirit of learning together, working together, and how we can improve it. And the final piece, which I'll say, which is, again, it's part of I am biased, is you can see in the background, that is a picture, an image of the SARS COVID virus. So again, these aren't normal times. This is not business as usual. And you know, the calculus for me is, I don't believe this has made our community safer. We spent a lot of time on this, and I really wish we spent more time on a buddy system. Do we know who hasn't been vaccinated yet? You know, are there things we could have used the time of our residents, our council, our attorney to have made our community safer? So again, I'm biased. I respect others' opinions. This is mine, and you know, obviously, I'm not for it. I think there are other ways that we can handle it, and I do hope that other members of the council consider my recommended amendment or edit, where all complaints first go to the council, and then the council can refer them to an ethics committee if they can't handle it. Thank you, and I really appreciate your patience, and I apologize if I've overtaken my time. Thank you.
Okay, just one factual correction before we go on to Katya. The reason I reacted was because I'm quite sure you were at that August meeting, and I'm quite sure there was no resident complaint. We can fact check it, whatever, and it's a minor point, but that's probably what you saw. So thank you. Okay, Katya?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're responding to, but we take it offline. I'm happy to.
Sure, great. Perfect. Okay, Katya.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will try to be brief, to be respectful of everyone's time.
Jeff, can you share your screen?
That would be great.
Yes. Thank you.
So as I said, I will try to be brief to respect all of your time. We have gone through this for 10 months. A lot of the information that has been shared today from the opposition has been repeated over and over again without really expanding the points. And why I really, really respect your opinions, I do believe that a lot of it was not factual, which is unfortunate. I'm very thankful to the ethics committee for taking the time and for being very thorough, very patient, and for making a lot of significant changes to the proposed ordinance to address the concerns that have been raised. It is unfortunate to see that that has not been, at least in my opinion, it has not been appreciated as much as I would hope that it would be. But here we are, continuing to talk this further through by repeating the same information again and again. I personally don't see any more value to it, so I would suggest that we would move it for a vote and see where it lands us.
So do we want to take a vote at this point?
Susan, before you take a vote, I just wanted to see if maybe the council, I think you made the for Arthur suggested an edit, and I did. Maybe, Ron, you know the procedure. Do we first do those, or how do you proceed with that?
Yeah, so technically, under Robert's rules, but we don't have to strictly follow Robert's rules. There could be a motion, and then there could be a request, friendly or unfriendly, to amend the motion. But before we get into that, and perhaps without the need for formality, there could be additional discussion on the proposed edit.
And actually, I don't think Todd has spoken.
Yeah, and
Have you, Todd?
And I have one suggested edit as well before you vote.
Thank you.
So much of what I would say, everybody has said for the most part. I will say that I feel that we've put together a very open process of over the past many months of creating opportunities for residents to make comments. I know that the 4 or 5 ethics committee meetings, every comment that was provided was at least considered, and some were addressed in the drafting of the ordinance. And I think the toughest thing is that I'd love to be able to talk about. Ron addressed this is coming up with an example. Phil and I exchanged some emails earlier, and he said, "God, if you could just come up with some kind of hypothetical, that would be so helpful to everybody to really understand what was going on." And like Ron, I wrestled with this, trying to find, how could I come up with something hypothetical that would help you understand what prompted this. And there was no way for me to figure out how to do that without abridging confidentiality. I'll just say that there was a serious couple of complaints that were lodged earlier this year. And we basically conveyed those complaints to those who were on the receiving end, and all we could do was leave it at that. When we talk about things like unintended consequences, with adopting things and just not anticipating everything that could come about, I can tell you this, that the consequences of these complaints, were they true, would have damaged potentially the village for years to come. And that's how serious they were. And we were stuck without a process. So that was the impetus. And I'll go back to Jeff, relayed some of the history of things. In July, the first meeting of the new council, we did go into an executive session. We discussed the complaints, and I will take ownership of this. It was my recommendation that because we had a committee that already was set up and structured to address conflicts of interest, that it made sense to expand the authority to have this committee also look at ethical complaints. And these are complaints, as we have said, that revolve around an existing oath of office that would in fact set up a process for addressing these types of complaints. So that was the purpose of doing this. And the first committee meeting of the ethics committee meeting was in August, at the direction of the council to start pursuing this process for this ordinance. And I guess we've all talked about the some of the misinformation, or will this be an impediment to others seeking offices? I will say this. I at the end of the day, I take to heart the prelude to the Maryland Code, which Mark read earlier, which is this, and I'm going to repeat it. The General Assembly of Maryland, recognizing that our system of representative government is dependent in part upon the people maintaining the highest trust in their public officials and officers, finds and declares that the people have a right to be assured that the impartiality and independent judgment of public officials and officers will be maintained. And what we're asking for here is not that people take an oath of office. That's already there. What we're talking about here is the expectation that if you're going to take the oath of office, you'll adhere to it by being held accountable to it, and providing a process to address that. That is what we're doing here. What we have done in other instances is to lessen the penalties so that we've removed some of the more onerous parts of that. We now are really creating a good process that adds to this piece. So that's really what I will add to this that hasn't already been said in some form or fashion. So now I'll turn it back to you, Susan, for any next steps and edits.
Todd, I have actually one question for you,
Yes.
and I appreciate it, and I think you've been thoughtful and certainly dogged in terms of your point of view. And I have one question, which is the infraction that you're talking about, the one that's so serious with implications in future years. I just have a question again, but was that something that I've been privy to? The reason why I say that was I was in the closed meeting and I remember very clearly what we talked about, but I had a different opinion on the approach. So I'm just curious, is there another issue that we're talking about that was from a prior council? Because I don't know, maybe I don't have all the information. I'm just curious.
No, I think we talked about this, and where's Ron? I think we covered this issue in that closed session in July.
Okay. So again, we can agree to disagree that I felt that it could be handled differently. Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, how did you think it could be handled?
I felt that this was something that could be handled through improved SOPs. And also, again, the idea that as council members, we could either with cause or without, we could always dismiss a member of a standing committee if we felt there was conflict. But I have always felt this could be handled through SOP and directly by the council without needing to refer. And except with the exception of this idea of when you lack a quorum, then again, you have exception rules. And that's why I feel this is very reasonable. I just feel that we need a hybrid approach with guardrails. Thank you.
Okay, so at this point, I think we're ready to vote.
May I offer a suggestion?
Yes, please.
So, some residents comment tonight that they find the process appropriate, but are concerned about the process and the duty being stated in code instead of in policy. I thought one way to address that is, under Maryland law, municipalities can establish by ordinance what infractions of code are civil infractions or criminal infractions, as I've stated earlier, and also that there's no infraction. So what if we added a sentence, new paragraph D, on the last page of the draft, section 4204, add a new D. A violation of this chapter shall not constitute a civil or criminal infraction. Enforcement of this chapter shall be limited to the provisions of this chapter, which are removal, and shall not include the penalties set forth in chapter 3 of this code, where fines are set forth. Therefore, although the process is in the code, and therefore a binding process for resolution, a violation of impartiality is not deemed a civil or criminal infraction.
That was the referred to earlier this evening.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds okay to me. It's not saying anything different, it's just making it explicit.
Right.
Sounds fine to me as well.
Yes. So with that.
And confining it to the statutory committees. And what about, there's one extra thing.
I think we have to all agree to confine it to.
Right, but I just wanted one other thing. Is the tree supervisor fall under, I mean, it is statutory, but does he fall under that umbrella?
Yeah, so if Arthur's amendment is agreed to, I would suggest, instead of using standing committee, because we don't define standing committee, and someone may argue, well, our social committee is standing because they've been standing for 20 years. So maybe instead we just say, a public official or official means all members of the village council all members of the election committee and the ethics committee
Yes.
and the village tree supervisor and all persons employed by the village.
I would even question the tree supervisor. Is there a good reason for that? I can't think of any.
I think the tree supervisor would be, under the Maryland Constitution, an office of public trust, especially if the ordinance we are later to study tonight is adopted, because the tree supervisor would be tasked with monitoring compliance of that code, including the planting of the required environmental.
I'm going to suggest taking that out, but when we get to that stage, yeah.
And you know, I just want to say I really appreciate Arthur's suggestions, and I support them, but it's kind of a cascade for me. And again, I respect differences of opinions, but I just wanted to know if folks could address in a cordial, you know, hopefully friendly way, the suggestion that the council first receives complaints and then it's their decision to pass it along. I know, Ron, that was also in your research. It was one of your bullet points. So I don't need to force anyone to take a vote, but I would just be curious, how do folks feel? Because I know that in the past we've talked about guardrails, and I know others have actually talked strongly about this. So I'd be curious if others feel the importance of the guardrails, where the council is the arbitrator. They're the ones who first see it, unless they lack a quorum or there's some conflict.
Let me say something in support of that. I'm not sure I fully agree with it, but I do have an argument to support it. It's that, as I've said before, under the oath of office, impartiality is only one of the many charges that an official agrees to. And so there could be other complaints coming up that a person never comes to the meetings. They're not doing their, they're not putting their full energy, or whatever the words are for it. It's getting late, I can't remember the words now. So there could be other complaints having to do with other issues that would come to the council, and then they would have to decide, is this an impartiality question or is this something else? And so there is a rationale for all complaints coming to the council and saying this is an impartiality issue, shoot it over to the ethics committee. This is a person not acting energetically, we'll handle that. So there is an argument you can make for it, but I'm willing to hear other people's points. Ron, you're screwing up your eyes at that. Or maybe it's just getting late.
No, yeah, not related to your comment, but related to my eyes getting old and looking at screens.
Okay, right, okay.
I was trying to read through the code as you were commenting.
Oh, okay.
Trying to figure out where things might go, if that were the case.
Yeah. Finally, yeah, I'm off you. So my comment pertaining to the guardrails is, I think, you know, when we first talked about guardrails, and that was in the I guess, Jeff, I think it was with the February meeting where we were talking about the safety.
Right, safety committee.
Safety task force. We were talking about guardrails as it pertained to the safety committee initiating things with the police, or making recommendations to the police or other bodies, without having any kind of authority or without involving the council. And so that's really where the topic of the guardrails came up, which is a little bit different, I think, than what you're proposing here. I look at the guardrails on this as the process we're putting in place, and that without that process, and without, which is already pretty well put together with it's already in there with for the ethics committee as it pertains to conflicts. I think we lose guardrails if we don't have that process, and we have process already embedded with the ethics committee for conflicts. So that's why when I saw that, and when you were going through that, while I give you lots of kudos for trying to come up with something that that might be less onerous, that didn't resonate for me. It just didn't do the trick for me on that, and I'm not sure that really does it. I mean, I think that when it comes to something like ethics, the having a committee of 3 or how many and a council of 5 or how many actually creates more opportunities to dilute any kind of personal approaches and things. So that's why I was I really am not as in favor of what you're suggesting.
Thanks, Todd. And I've shared with you, and I'll share with others, anytime I hear a message from Todd on my voicemail, it always seems to make me calmer. He has one of those demeanors that just makes you feel really comfortable. And, you know, we can just respectfully disagree. I feel that if there's a complaint that you feel is going to impact our community for the next decade and is that materially serious, I believe the council should take a look at it before it gets referred. But again, we can disagree. And one final quick substantive point, Ron, if you're still there, is there any preclusion to a council serving on the ethics committee? Like I said, I have a background in ethics. I'm wondering, is it only restricted to residents? Because I'm just curious.
I believe Ron's looking it up right now, but as I recall, the committees are non-council members. I think it's explicit.
Yeah.
That's right, Arthur. It is explicitly stated in section 2101B. So members of the ethics committee shall be qualified to vote in village elections and shall not be members of the village council or the elections committee.
That's the old council that, you know, now that we're expanding the jurisdiction, but we can take that. Okay. Gotcha.
Okay. Okay, so shall we proceed?
Yes, let's, why don't we vote on the possibility or on the proposal, the proposed ordinance with a provision that will restrict it to, I guess, statutory committees?
Or
stated
explicitly, I think.
Okay, so the restrict it to the election committee, the ethics committee, and the tree supervisor, and then include the statement that it shall be limited to the provisions as Ron stated earlier, so that it's clear there are no penalties other than.
Yes.
We can either vote with those provisos, or we can vote as is.
With those provisos, yes.
And Susan, I just have a question. So what about the recommendation which I had around it first going to the council? Is that only
let's address that first.
Okay. If we want to vote on going to the council first, someone can make a motion.
Sure, I'd be delighted to. I'd like to make a motion that all complaints, ethics, impartiality, or otherwise, would first go to the council, and then the council, at their discretion, would refer to an ethics committee if they needed to.
Okay. Second?
I would say I kind of like it, but I'm not going to second it. I think we will be getting complaints that do not go to the, or we could get complaints that do not go to the ethics committee because it's not under their remit. So we would be getting those.
Okay. So do we now want to go ahead and someone make a motion that we vote on the proposed ordinance with the language restricting enforcement to the provisions as Ron specified, and applying it to the standing committees, i.e., or the statutory committees, the election committee, the ethics committee, and the tree supervisor?
I will so move.
And I will second that.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Opposed?
I'm abstaining in that I agree it should be narrowed, but I still believe ultimately all complaints should first go to the council before they're referred. So, but I appreciate, Arthur, just like you didn't vote for my suggestion, I appreciate your suggestion, but I'm going to refrain. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I think we have a new ordinance.
Yeah, just to be clear, that does apply to council members too. And I, for one, am more than happy to be covered by this ordinance. I have no qualms, totally comfortable with it.
And let me just add that as I had a complaint registered against me when I was council chair roughly 10 years ago, and there was no place for it to go because of this absence of any adjudication authority by the Ethics Committee. So a complaint was raised in public, and the Ethics Committee correctly said, Josh will remember this, he was sitting next to me, I believe. They had no authority over it, but they chose to give an opinion anyway. And I see Tiffany is still there. She was sitting on the other side of me at the time. So we were very clear, very aware at the time that these kinds of complaints, there was no place for them. And for a council member, we could not judge ourselves. We can judge committee members, but not other council members. So it was dropped at that point. So this does fill a kind of a hole. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Arthur.
Okay, shall we move on?
Let's move on. I just want to say one thing I want to thank everybody. I mean, this was a very, whether we agreed on the outcome or not, I thought this was a very positive and instructive session. I want to thank all the residents for showing up and contributing to that, as well as to the members of the Ethics Committee for all of their hard work, as well as my fellow council members. So thank you for everything.
And for those who said there has not been an opportunity to participate, there were 54 people here tonight.
Right, and many of these people have attended multiple, if not all, of the other hearings too. We actually have had a very full hearing on this, so good process.
Can I just say one thing that I did not say before, and that is I really thank Lori and Debbie Rumel for their very hard work on this. I didn't do that in my early comment. And also, I want to say something I did say. Obviously, I had concerns about some of the messages we received, but also I want to again thank the people who sent suggestions that we did implement and used in the code, particularly with respect to due process, and they were very helpful, so we thank them as well.
Thanks, Mark. We also are very appreciative of all of your committee members' very hard work. Thank you all.
Yes, I'd also like to thank Mark Efron for his leadership on the committee, Todd as the liaison of the Ethics Committee, Debbie, my fellow Ethics Committee member, and all the residents, because most of the comments we received were helpful, and we did include them in the drafting of the ordinance.
And I think we do have some residents who I've not seen before, and I welcome you all, and a few that we have seen.
Right. Okay, so with that, I guess we are ready to move on to the discussion and possible introduction of an ordinance to adopt an urban forest program.
Right, I would, whoops. Did I just lose myself?
Nope, you're
here.
here.
You're still here.
Oh, okay.
Unless you're speaking metaphorically.
No, I think I'm getting hoarse. Yeah, I would like to introduce this ordinance with one change that was alluded to before. This was brought to my attention, and I did not intend this in the original, but that there's one clause that says the environmental impact tree, that will be installed on a property where there is a sediment control permit. The environmental impact tree must be installed in a location approved in advance by the tree supervisor. I think that language, Ron, was taken from our regular ordinances. The tree supervisor does participate in the location of the village trees, but I don't think it's necessary for a private tree. So I would like to take that out of the draft draft ordinance. With that, I would like to introduce the ordinance as written, except for that one sentence.
Okay, do we have a motion to introduce?
I will move to introduce. I think we need a second, if anyone is interested in seconding it.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay.
I love trees, so thank you.
We all love trees. Who can hate trees? Unlike the ethics. Okay, so.
And I will remind everybody that this is the same burden that is placed by the county that the village has opted out of. And some residents have noted that they say that there's a little X mark in the permit that says not needed here because the village has opted out. So this brings us back into the conformance with the county, but we get to keep the money and we get to encourage tree planting.
Okay, so do we want to vote on?
Can I just comment on why I put that one sentence?
Oh yeah, please do. Yeah.
So the thought there was, this ordinance is modeled closely after the county's shade tree ordinance, as everybody knows.
Yes, right.
Under the county code, if you're disturbing a certain amount of land, you've got to plant 3 trees. And the county wants you to plant 3 trees because their studies showed that in likelihood only 1 out of the 3 is going to survive to a mature height. And so my thought with adding a statement that the tree supervisor needs to approve the location is that that would be to improve the likelihood of success of that 1 tree and avoid situations where someone could plant a tree in a location that has very little chance of success.
Okay. Okay. I just thought it added.
Property, right?
What's that, Katya?
The supervisor would be approving it on private property when the trees.
That's right. That was the problem that I had.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was agreed that we should take that out then? Okay. Okay, so we have an introduction and a second. We can vote on whether we want to introduce this at this point. If it is introduced, it would then have a final vote when 30 days from now?
There'd be a public hearing. And after the public hearing, the council could decide whether to approve it.
Right, okay.
Or we could do more research in the interim at the next, over the next month or so. Okay, so all in favor of introducing?
As amended?
As amended.
As amended. About 2 votes. 3 votes.
Yeah.
4.
Okay, I'll go for it, provided we can do a lot more research on it. But we'll have a lot more time.
Like what?
Oh, I just want to look into it more.
Oh.
I've been a little distracted with all this,
Right, other things, okay. Okay, let's move on.
Okay. Yes, so, we are now at the point of discussing the budgetary matters, financial matters, including the treasurer's report, introduction of the fiscal year budget ordinance, and tax rate resolutions. Arthur?
Okay, the treasurer's report, or the budget report, has been available. It's really kind of boring because there has not been much change from last year. We went through this item by item by budget item, looking at both revenues and expenditures. We reduced the one item that we reduced that we thought was running low was interest payments, but with the current state of the economy, we may have acted too soon. Interest rates have been heading up again, so our revenues from that source might increase. The one thing to talk about is we really don't have enough to talk about, and that is from the CARES Act, there is a large amount of money that may come to the village that's allocated, but I've read the accompanying documents, and you have to spend it on very specific kinds of items, none of which we do. So
like broadband, you said.
like broad expansion of broadband,
Arthur?
or rolling out vaccinations, and all sorts of activities that the village does not engage in, unless I miss something.
Yeah. Arthur, can I just comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah,
No.
so as you said, most of what they have explicitly talked about in the act are things that we don't currently do, right? On a call with Senator Van Hollen that MML put together that I was on, he explained that those examples are illustrative, not restrictive, or at least that was his interpretation. Now that's one senator. Who knows what are you saying?
Right.
Further guidance will come from the Treasury Department, and that's what I don't want to say what we can and can't do if they don't tell us what we can and can't do. What I understand though is that whatever we decide we have to do is that there's no application for this. So we'll get the money and then we have to decide if we have applicable expenses and then deal it that way. It's an interesting process. It is not entirely very clear, I would say, but I just wanted to say that that's the information I have. But as I said, what they put in, the categories that they put in the bill, most of them do not apply. So.
Okay, good,
right?
Thank you. So I can see that I would put out right now, if we get the money and it is within categories that we can do, that moving forward on the walkability recommendations is a good place to do the kind of investment, long-term investment in the community that would fulfill the spirit of the bill. Okay, so that's you have the document in front of you. You have the current spending patterns and revenue patterns that we see. We can adopt a resolution right now. So Ron, what is it we do now? We adopt the budget and the tax rates.
We're introducing tonight.
We are introducing them right now.
Arthur, I just want to comment really quickly, and I appreciate the discussion on the funds, and I know it's still murky, but I do believe that there are some other things that could really strengthen our community, both safety as well as communication. For example, in the past, we've talked about the expense of perhaps even a new listserv, or the possibility of a message board, or some kind of taking it to the next level to facilitate a better community engagement. And I would argue, having spoken to other council members on the actual Montgomery County Council, that they feel there'll be enough bandwidth in terms of when the monies are allocated to us, that we would have the discretion to perhaps use some of those. Like, for
I think
example,
if we get them, we should consider this very carefully at that point.
Yeah, because I would say one thing that would be interesting is we've had so much participation in this virtual Zoom. I would love for Niles, he doesn't have to be staring at his screen the whole time, but maybe in the village office we have a state-of-the-art video console, because I would like to see the Zoom meetings go forward.
Right, I do too. When we get back to real meetings, let's do it. So, okay, start making your lists. Okay, so we will introduce resolution, we will introduce the budget resolution and the tax resolution at this time.
We have a motion.
I will so move to introduce both the budget and the separate tax resolutions. There are 3 of them, I believe.
It's two. There's two things.
Okay.
One is the budget ordinance, and then the other is the tax rate. So we're setting the tax rates for the next year.
And the tax rates are not changing.
Staying the same. Same low number.
Yes.
So, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Todd second.
Todd, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay, moving on.
So, Niles, it's your turn.
Okay, so with
Manager.
Yes, with the manager's report, we have a couple of different things that I just wanted to reference. One thing relates to last meeting, where we talked about the walkability task force, their recommendations. I've been in conversation with the traffic engineer and with the building administrator to talk about what we can do now, what requires more engineering work, that kind of thing, to based on the recommendations of that, so sort of an action plan. And then for the election, last Friday, the RFP closed for the election service provider. We have two proposals. Interviews with those providers happened yesterday. And there's a couple of follow-up questions that I'm getting information back from those proposals, and we will have a vendor very soon. I just want to cross our T's and dot our I's to make sure that we are good there, and we'll add that.
Niles, quickly, when Kathy Howard brought up the gas emergency,
yes,
it was the first time I've heard of that.
I will. Yes. So, as she mentioned, there was a gas leak. Once I was aware of it, I sent an email out to the affected streets and to the village council, actually. So, it was reported in that fashion.
When was that?
That, as she said, February 12th. And then subsequent to that, once I heard that the situation was all clear, I sent out another email saying that was all clear. I only got the information that the contractor and Washington Gas told me. Following that, and I had a conversation with Katie Howard, and I thank her for being on this and talking to me about it. I've had subsequent conversations with Washington Gas about what happened, and with the contractors, and we'll continue to have those conversations. In fact, I'm going to talk to the contractors of that project again. To Katie's point about following up, I understand that, and I will try to better communicate with these issues and figuring out if there are any steps that the village can take. One of the issues here is that this type of issue is something that is dealt with primarily by the fire department and Washington Gas and things like that. So there's not necessarily a role in the village to deal with the actual issue, but there is a role to deal with in terms of communicating, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate Katie's comments tonight. So I just want to say that. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Arthur?
Yeah.
I was called or talked to a resident on Delafield Street who, and this is where Delafield and Taylor meet. They've had so much water in the gas lines there that it's shutting down house services, and it has affected, that water has gone up into some of the equipment in the houses, and it may require WSSC Washington Gas Light come in and actually check the houses for the water deposits, which are damaging and affecting that. And Washington Gas usually tries to avoid doing that, and it's pretty necessary that it be done.
And Larry, thank you for that. I talked to, actually, you'd referred this to the office, and I had talked to the resident that was involved as well, and I've talked to Washington Gas about that as well, trying to put it on their radar from our contacts, and I appreciate that conversation as well. So we'll go from there. Okay. And then, so also just so the other thing, just to, the village office, going back to the election, the village office is completing the updating of the voter roll. We've identified all the people who've changed since last year, and is just updating it for it to be prepared. We'll send out some communications shortly, reminding people, hey, if you're in the directory, if you got a ballot last year, you're on the voter roll this year, except for those who've moved out. And as I said, we've already identified those who've moved out and those who've moved in. For the most part, there are a few people still moving in, but we'll have more communication about that, just to remind everybody. And if you have someone new or need something to, or if there's people who need to add information, we can do that as well. For the Public Safety Task Force, last Friday we put out the call for volunteers. We've already had, I believe, 4 responses. People have until March 25th to submit if they are so interested. So just a reminder there. We talked about the American Rescue Plan. There's a street light that was put in on Thornapple Street that had been approved in November of 2019, and we finally got that actually installed by Pepco, which was good. And then we are preparing for new RFPs to go out around street maintenance and for waste and recycling services. And that concludes the manager's report.
Boo.
Okay, that was great, Niles, and it's also very encouraging to hear that the impending or possible adoption of a new ethics ordinance did not deter volunteers. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to hear that we have 4 people who've already stepped forward, and there's still some time, so maybe we'll have an even more full slate. That's great. Okay.
Yes, but I just want to comment that if my understanding is the ethics ordinance doesn't apply to the task force, so
it wouldn't, but at the time people
didn't know that.
I just thought
okay. So now we are ready for additional comment.
Actually, Susan, I want to ask one quick clarification. There have been a lot of questions that have come up, and I see Tiffany iPad is here as well. There's been a little bit of discussion about the verification of the signature on the voter roll. And so, Niles, maybe you could just talk to alleviate that tire pressure. Could people
Certainly.
be confident that, for example, if whatever name is stated on the envelope where they receive it, that is what they should, because I think...
Certainly. Right.
Yeah.
So what happened last year, I'll reference what happened last year, as it's the same procedure as this year, is what the service provider did is check, to make sure that the names matched based on what was on the address. So what was on your ballot matched what was on the voter roll, and then checked it for to make sure it was consistent. If there were any questions on if there's a question about a signature, which did not happen last year, but generally speaking, that is something that the election committee itself gets to adjudicate. So it gets to say, yes, this ballot does connect with this household. So, for example, a good example is if someone used Tom instead of Thomas, right? That's something that you could easily say, yes, this is the same person, and do that kind of check. So that's the way that it was done last year, and I mean the committee obviously can make its choice, but that was sort of the understanding, and that's how it sort of goes going forward. Okay.
That's great, Niles. And do you have actually just a figure? Were there any ballots that were rejected because of not matching signatures?
No, there were none.
Zero incidents. Okay.
Correct.
Awesome. Thank you.
So at this time, we can hear any resident comments from anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak on anything other than the ethics ordinance. If anyone didn't have a chance to speak in the earlier resident comments on some other topic, that would be great.
Okay, may I address the election?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Thank you. My name again is Katie Filipchek Howard. I'm at 3510 Taylor Street. I'm really kicking myself that I didn't lead with this in the beginning comment section, because I can see half the residents have fallen off the call, and that's really who I wanted to address. I would like the record to show that I nominated myself for the 2021 council election. My email timestamp was March 5th, 2021, 11:59 p.m. I have the email timestamp as proof. But however, the VMA Elections Committee did not accept my nomination for the 2021 ballot. An email dated March 7th states, the nomination period closed at 11:59 p.m. on Friday, March 5th, before your email was received. Accordingly, it cannot be accepted for this year's ballot. I think I call foul on that. I don't think that's fair. I think we could start a debate on prepositional phrasing of add on by 11:59. I have proof that I sent it at 11:59. Now, the reason why did I hem and haw till the final hour? Well, I mean, I've run before, and my last attempt at office was horrendous when I ran against Team Richard and Katya, because one resident in the village viciously harassed me on the listserv. But the residents where I live, in my neck of Martin's Addition, come to me to run for council. So I think that that is bogus. And I think that I'd like to point out that for 6 years now, The residents of Taylor Street, Chestnut, both Delfields, Thornapple, Summit, we have not had a representative who lives in this neighborhood at the table, at the virtual table of the council. I mean, 4 out of 5 of your members live on or near Raymond Street, and it shows. And, you know, I just really hope that the residents will turn out, well, we can't, mail in, please mail in your ballots, write in a candidate's name if it's an incumbent. It's unfortunate we don't have term limits. I'm sorry, but some of your council members have stayed too long at the fair, and it shows. I mean, the residents have stated, these are the things I have heard about your council: dismissive, haughty, draconian, rude. You know, my mother, Jill Filipchek, was a council member, and she was well regarded and reelected, and she respected the residents because those are the people who voted for her. She didn't roll her eyes at them. She didn't pontificate. She didn't talk down to them. So I'm glad to hear that there are other people that are going to be on the ballot. I think I should be on the ballot. And I hope to God there's a return of civility. And because you current members, with the exception of Jeff and Todd, you're newer, so that you're an exception. But the rest of you, well, you're no Jill Filipchek. You're not my mother. And it's unfortunate. So I'd like to know if the residents think an 11:59 timestamp suffices.
Thank you, Katie. Would anyone else like to speak?
Well, before we move on, Lynn, I'm so sorry. You know how much I respect you. Let me just make a quick inquiry. Ron, so with something like this, I mean, we've all talked about ordinances and complaints and things like that. So if something has been passed, right? So how does that work? Because if there is evidence of a timestamp and there needs to be an adjudication, this doesn't seem like an ethics or impartiality. What is your thought process here? Perhaps Katie doesn't want to pursue it, which is fine, but it would actually be of interest of how does one resolve a complaint like this that has immediate implications. And Lynn, I apologize. I just wanted to if we get a quick rebuttal on that.
Yeah, I need to look into the issue. Not prepared to give an answer tonight. I mean, my initial thought would be we got to look at the election rules. Maybe there's ordinarily we try and keep the council removed from election issues, and so the election committee adjudicates election issues. But let me look into it. Maybe there ought to be
and maybe just
some right of appeal to the council or something.
Yeah, and a quick question, because maybe
and looked at without incumbents running for re-election.
And Katie, quick question for you. I mean, is that something you'd want? I'm not saying this is going to go anywhere. I have no idea, but I mean, is that you if you could be added, would you want to be, or is this more of just for us to absorb? It was unclear what action you wanted to take.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for asking that. And thank you for being such a respectful council member. And you're a wonderful new addition. I would run. I am concerned about one resident harassing me, again, running. It does concern me. But I'm also concerned about this ordinance. I mean, I would have voted against it, if you want to know. I'll put it right out there. Our part of the ordinance edition needs to be represented. So if the people will have me, I will run, and I'll give you a run for your money. Because I'm sick of the same old. And you shouldn't just win re-election shenanigans. It's re-election shenanigans.
I don't think we want to introduce the topic of shenanigans with election without knowing the facts. It's probably not a good idea.
So I would like to just speak up briefly as I came here ambivalent, but based on the eye rolling from the council members, Susan, I will fully support you, Katie.
That's good.
Ron, I think, Katie, you should send Ron all the evidence you have so he can look at it and see where we go from there. I see caught you shaking your head.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay.
May I speak?
Oh, there's Larry. Okay.
Yeah. So Kathleen, I'm running and I'm on Delafield Street, but I think this is absurd that that type of timing would be used as any kind of an excuse to any person that wants to participate in our government should be there should be the positive look at it rather than trying to argue about a few seconds. And I totally support you being a nominee or a candidate for running, and I think that's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Larry.
I would like to chime in on that if I could, since I've also put my name in, or I got nominated by a neighbor, which was lovely. Katie, welcome aboard, and I would love to have you be on the ballot, and I say that as our former election committee chair, that I think that excluding you from the ballot on the basis of the timestamp where you have the evidence that you did submit it on time strikes me as quite inappropriate. And so I would warmly welcome you and would look forward to running, an election with your name on the ballot next to Larry's and mine. So thank you for putting your name forward.
Thank you, Marty. And I will just add, I will say, mine is the Sinfield. It says the date, and it says 11:59 p.m. Now, I don't know if by the time the Village of Martin's Additions Election Committee received it, it was 11:59 or 12 on the dot. I don't know. But mine said 11:59. I read the deadline as 11:59, March 5th.
I would have read it the same way.
Yeah, we really don't want to talk about election irregularities at this.
Why?
Without opening the door to other things. Okay, would you like to speak? Would you please state your name and street for the record?
Hi, yeah, my name is Kathy Bishop and I live on Taylor Street.
Hi.
And I am a neighbor of Katie's and I've lived on our street for 36 years. But yeah, 11:59 is not midnight and she should totally be able to be on the ballot. It makes no sense to me. So I totally support her being able to be on the ballot. That just, no one yet has answered why she was refused.
I don't think we have anybody from the elections committee on the line.
I don't think so either.
While I am very appreciative of Katie putting her name forward as well as Larry and Marty, I think this is absolutely great that we have more residents running, and residents will have an option to select, incumbents or not. I don't know if any of the incumbents are running. It's just kind of awkward to discuss it with just one side. So we should probably take it offline. Definitely follow up. Katie, please send everything that you have to Ron. We should definitely follow up on that, but not in this forum.
Right.
What is the forum?
I would think that we would need the elections committee to be involved to at least voice their side. Otherwise, we're at this point accusing the elections committee of making a decision. They're not present to respond to that. That part is a little awkward.
I don't think it's an accusation. Well, it is, but it's also a fact.
It may not be. It could be an oversight. It may not be. There's no need to accuse.
11:59 and midnight?
It still could be an accident.
Good to have both sides present.
I see. Tell you, Larry?
That is all.
Yep.
Not making a decision or expressing any siding here. I'm just simply saying that there must be two sides to this. So.
It can be an oversight.
Okay, let's move on. Ron will get the information and we will move on from there.
Right. Do we have any additional comments from anyone who hasn't spoken already? And if
Lynn Welly is here.
Oh, Lynn?
Yes.
Okay.
This is regard to the usage of streets by contractors, even when there's a provision made for
taking street parking away from residents with regard to construction zones. Arthur Alexander may remember that a couple weeks ago, I was over on Raymond Street. I think it's 3515 or whatever the place, the house that's been demolished and construction is going on. It would seem that residents have been getting the short end of the stick in favor of contractors when it comes to the use of the street and where they park. I would like the culture of this to change so that in the future, and as soon as possible in the future, when there's a reservation or a ban for street parking taken away from residents, that it be the contractors who park on the side of the street where it is legal to park. If it so happens that their construction site or their work zone is on the other side of the street, well then so be it. Let's leave the traffic lane that is normally used by anyone be left open for traffic, as opposed to the contractor being able to park on the side of the street that is normally used for traffic, whereas the other side is for parking. I think the contractor should always park on the side of the street that is legal parking, and the traffic lane should always be left open for traffic. This would avoid weaving from one side of the street to the other. And so this is just a culture change I would like all of you to start to think about, so that it can be enacted, and that when contractors get their permits, that they sign off and recognize that this is going to be the deal. I think it would affect safety over the long range, and put residents at a priority over contractors for their short-term period of time when they're here doing their work. That's that on that issue. With regard to the elections procedures, I think the plan is riddled with things that should not be as printed. Just a very quick summation, which I sent forward earlier today, this afternoon, that wherever the word resident or residents appear in the plan for the 2021 election, that the word resident or resident should be replaced by VMA qualified voter. Because resident is very limited and restrictive. It just about indicates voter suppression. There are people who own property in Martin's Addition. They happen to not live here at the time. They're absentee owners, but they are qualified voters. And by saying resident, you're eliminating them. They shouldn't be eliminated as a qualified voter. Then the other thing on this is the timing, with the Postal Service being not so serviceable these days, and God knows how much time it's taking for mail to pass back and forth. We need more time for ballots to be sent to the residents from the service provider. I would like to know, can someone tell me now what the location of the service provider is?
So, Lynn, so as I mentioned earlier, we are right now concluding the procurement process for that. So we have two vendors right now. What I can tell you is that one is based in New Jersey and the other is based in Michigan. Okay?
All right, so herein lies the problem. We have out-of-state vendors, and we're going to be relying on the United States Postal Service, which is doing a lousy job of getting stuff through the mail quickly these days, and allowing only 1 week for stuff to come from them to us and then go back to them on a timely basis. We need more time in this plan for all of this to be taken care of, whether it's Michigan or New Jersey.
Lynn, it will not be just 1 week. It's 1 week from the postmark date to when it can be received. But you will have probably in the range of a month to get your, maybe a little short of a month to get your ballot in. So from when the ballots go out, which will be the middle of April, to May, which is what it was done last year, to the middle of May will be the period in which you can get your ballot in. The week deadline that is referred to, and we talked about this earlier in the meeting, is between the date it's postmarked and the date is received at the vendor. So we're trying to build in time to make sure that people's ballots get received in a based on sort of the framework of people's of postal delays and things like that. So that is being kept in mind with the way the dates were set up.
Well, the thing is, in the plan, there's no specification as to when the ballots would be mailed out to the residents.
It says, hang on one, yeah. It actually says in it mid to late April, I believe. So it actually does specify the range of dates. We just wanted to make sure, since when getting this procurement from the vendor, we want to confirm the dates with them to make sure that we are maximizing those dates.
I'm looking at the plan right now. I have it in front of me. I don't see anything which makes reference to a time period when these ballots would be sent from the vendor to us.
Okay, let me double check that. I apologize if I misspoke out of turn there, but I will check that to make sure. But
I would not be bringing this up.
No, I understand that. Yes.
Okay.
I think we put it in the communication. It was definitely in the communication that was in the newsletter.
Yeah,
that
but
stated
the thing is,
yes.
I'm looking at the plan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at the plan when this I think is supposed to be the guiding light for this thing.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate your point there. So, thank you, Lynn.
So just regardless of who you choose, Michigan or New Jersey, we need to be highly sensitive to the fact that this mail is going to have plenty of time to get back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And earlier somebody is saying, well, vote early. Well, we can't vote early if we don't get the stuff.
Right, and I would say, as the contract manager and so on, that is a concern that I take very seriously in talking to these vendors and making sure they got a copy of the plan. They know the dates as part of their bid packet, so they are aware of what we are asking of them as well.
But that's fine for them. But we on this end receiving this plan do not know that.
No, I appreciate that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so maybe that's a statement we need to add to the election rules for
Certainly.
next year. But I will say that the deadline for the provider to mail the ballots is set forth in the contract between the village and the vendor. And last year, the contract had a deadline of April 24 for the ballots to be mailed by the vendor to village residents.
All right, thank you. Now, another thing that I think is, you make reference to signature comparison or signature verification. Signature to me sounds like a script, something that has been handwritten. And is that correct or not?
So yes, in the parlance of elections, the signature is you writing your name. There's an affidavit that is part of the ballot packet, and you just sign that.
All right, so you're making reference to a signature verification. To me, then, that verification would be against another signature.
So that was not, as I said earlier, that was not how it was interpreted last year. What was the interpretation last year was comparing it to the voter roll to make sure that the names were the same. Not so much a comparison of a handwriting comparison.
Well, then I think the language of the plan should be changed to reflect that, because signature definitely to me is and probably a lot of other people would agree, is a script type of signature, as opposed to electronic data comparisons from one document to another. And in that sense, if we're using voter roll identification for verification, how in advance of all of this happening will a resident know how their name appears on the voter roll, so that when they sign the envelope or sign anything they have to sign, that it'll be matched.
So you will receive a ballot that has your name and address on it. Envelope. I'm sorry, I should say an envelope with your name and address on it. That's the same name and address as it appears on the voter roll. They're taken from the same thing.
Well,
So you could effectively just copy the name on the.
Yeah.
And Niles, isn't it true that the signature is not for verification? The printed name is for verification.
Right,
The
sir.
signature is for the affirmation.
For the affirmation, yes.
So
So
the
it's,
affidavit where you attest as a voter that you are a qualified voter and you
Yeah.
are the person who's filling out the ballot.
yes.
that's all very fine and dandy, but my question all hinges on what is the definition of a signature? Is it different if I'm writing a letter as opposed to this valid vote verification?
No. So as it said, it's just matching to make sure that you receive that the envelopes that were received match the people on the voter roll, and that the signature is signed, verifying that you are attesting that you are a qualified voter in the village.
Well, maybe in the future, the word signature could be excluded, and just voter roll data comparisons be used, so that for me, maybe other people like me, there is not this confusion.
We can. I think certainly the language can be looked at and see if there's ways of clarifying it. Okay.
Right. On page 3 of the plan, there's a third black dot, and then below that is the fourth white circle.
Lynn, if I might just interrupt, we're supposed to have a 2-minute thing, a 2-minute comment here.
I understand that, and I feel every time I start to talk that I'm being clamped before guilt.
But this has been quite a few minutes, and I
I
think
understand
these
that, and I
questions
appreciate
are
it.
really better addressed to the election committee.
I did address them to the election committee and the entire council today.
Yeah. So he sent an email earlier. I just haven't
Okay, I
gotten a
didn't see
chance.
it,
Yeah, I
but-
haven't gotten a
but
chance to
this isn't
share
really-
it. But
This isn't really the time, I mean, probably some of us haven't seen, we don't have an election committee member on here, so it would seem to just be an inopportune time to discuss. And there will be a better time with people who are prepared to discuss it.
The thing is, the election is coming up, and a
Right.
better time may
We'll
just
have
be
time.
that it's too late to make and deal with it.
Okay, well, your points have been taken. We really can't address this now. We're doing a lot of speculating, and it'd be better for you to just get an informed opinion.
Right, you interrupted me when I was gonna make my last 30-second thing. If I may finish that, please.
Of
Now,
course.
thank you.
30 seconds.
So the third dot down on the third page, and then the fourth white circle, I think that's it. Oh, no, it's not, it's the fifth dot down. It says that any ballot that is found to be improper will not be opened. Well, the ballot comes to the service provider in an unopened envelope. So how can they determine if a ballot is improper if it's still in an envelope that hasn't been unopened?
so I think
This is the way the language reads in the plan.
Let's look at that and have the election committee look at that. And as I said, I'll share around. I have all of your comments, and I'll share it with everyone, and then we can go from there.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you again for letting me be a bull in the china closet.
Thank you, Ben. Have a good
I appreciate all the time all you volunteers do to try to make this a better place to live and be a part of. I would like to continue to feel that I'm welcome to make my meager contributions.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Okay, so at this point, I think we have reached the end of the agenda, and we need a motion to adjourn.
Susan, before you adjourn, I have a 30-second or less one thing, and I'm sorry, but this is important. It has to do with just the climate and how we treat each other. And there was a statement made earlier, I forget who exactly said it, but it was in reference to others hating ethics. And I just want to put this out there that I don't see anyone...
I think I said it, and I would like to retract that comment. I was making a really bad joke, and obviously I think you know that that is not what I was intended to be. I didn't intend to suggest that anyone who doesn't subscribe to the need for a stronger ethics code hates ethics. It was a bad joke, and I think we're all very tired, and it would be really great if we could wrap this meeting up.
Great.
Yes, it's been 3.5 hours.
Yeah, it's time.
Great to get some rest.
If I could finish my comment, I just want to say, I didn't know, but thank you for reminding me. But the quick comment is, I don't think there's anyone who brought to discussion today hates anything. I think that there were different views expressed, and I think, again, going forward, it's good not to frame, if one person doesn't agree, they might hate something. But now that you mention it, though, I appreciate it must have been late, so that makes sense to me.
Thank you. Very well said. Okay, so at this point, may we have a motion to adjourn? Well, please. Yes, gotcha. Thank you.
If I